Chapter 1541. Qing Lu's voice was somewhat helpless. Since the formation of the Big Fruit Platter Alliance, more than 10,000 years have passed. Every 300 years, when the domain resonates, we will send people to rush over in advance and try to get in touch with the people in the nut realm. This kind of contact is actually very limited because we still can't really go in. But because of the resonance, we can establish a third space between the outer and inner realms and have limited contact. Contact must be made by the people in the inner realms. For them, because they never knew that humans can fly, they sent a request to the outside world in a way that invites gods. And we appear in the third space that they can see as gods and have limited communication. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're just pretending to be gods and ghosts, right? You're being so reserved. Do we have to offer you virgin boys and girls? I was wondering why the houses in your realms were abnormally sturdy and there were very few tall buildings. So it's to prevent earthquakes. Qing Lu shook his head. Junior brother Yin, don't make fun of us. We don't want to pretend to be gods. We're all on the big fruit platter. So who's more noble than who? You've been here for so many years, so you should know the character of us big fruit platter people. We won't pretend to be superior to others. But if there's a realm where their cultivators can't fly, can't go out of the atmosphere, can't see the real void of the universe, and can't come into contact with the outside world of cultivation, then they will naturally think that the cultivators outside, like us who can fly, are gods who have descended to the mortal world. We can't control this, so over time, we just let it be. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. That's understandable. This is the humans' yearning for flight and freedom. After a long time, it became a belief. Gods only appear because of ignorance. They will never think that the so-called gods are actually humans who pretend to be gods. What's the crisis you're talking about? Qing Lu was a bit solemn. 1,000 years ago, in our routine of pretending to be gods and ghosts, oh no, in the routine contact that happens once every 300 years, we discovered that a new species appeared in the nut realm. It appeared very abruptly. According to our judgment, it was a foreign species that was brought in through the transmission of energy from the Earth's core. This was because these creatures had never appeared in the nut territory before. They were very strange creatures. Some of them looked like Zerg. There were all kinds of insects, but they could not fly. They had tough skin and thick flesh, and they were not afraid of death. They moved by instinct. The sudden appearance of the earth crawlers 1,000 years ago dealt a heavy blow to the humans of the nut world. At that time, it was thanks to the fruit plate cultivators who were disguised as immortals in the third space that they were able to exert their influence through spells. Coupled with the resistance of the nut world's natives, we were able to withstand it. Lu Xiaoyi said, ground crawlers? Was he really unable to fly? Or is it the special environment of the nut world that limits their ability to fly? Qing Lu blushed with shame. Ground crawlers are what we call them, because we don't know what to call them. They weren't sure if it was Zerg because no Zerg had ever attacked this area, and no one had seen Zerg before, so it was hard to say. As for their inability to fly, our judgment was that it was due to the special environment of the nut world, not a problem with their own abilities. If the special restrictions of the nut world were removed one day, I think both the earth crawlers and the native humans will be able to fly, right? Lu Xiaoyi asked. In the nut world, did the earth crawlers and humans coexist? Qing Lu smiled bitterly. How could they coexist? The earth crawlers were bloodthirsty, and their invasion was nonstop. It was a life and death relationship. The first time it appeared, we, the so-called immortals from the outside, and humans were tenacious. We finally drove the earth crawlers back to the depths of the Earth's core, but we couldn't eradicate them because we couldn't go down into the realm. Those native cultivators didn't have such ability. But the strange thing was that after the earth crawlers returned to the depths of the Earth's core, they never appeared again. It wasn't until 300 years later that all the realms of the fruit plate resonated again. Qing Lu still had a lingering fear. Because we were already vigilant, the cultivators of the fruit plate who pretended to be immortals all had a certain level of fighting power. You don't know this, but because we could only interfere with the nut world from a third space, the power of our spells was reduced. Plus, we weren't very good at fighting in the first place. This time, there were more earth crawlers than the first time, and they were even stronger. The natives in the nut world were also prepared. They fought together with our companions who went in. It was very difficult, and they guarded the humans' border by a hair's breadth. This was the second time, and then the third time, which was 300 years ago. Because we knew the location of the earth crawler surprise attack, we began to choose suitable people from the fruit plate in advance for the last time. We even invited foreign cultivators to participate. This was the fourth time. According to the earth crawler's characteristics, each time they attacked, the humans in the fruit plate were in danger of being overturned, but we couldn't do anything about it. This was the reason why we invited Junior Brother Yin to the nut world. Qing Lu and the others had been in contact with Lu Xiaoyi for a long time. In the beginning, they did meet by chance, and they had similar temperaments, so they could talk to each other. However, after several years of contact, they slowly found that this passerby guest was somewhat different. Some temperaments could not be hidden from others, especially for someone like Lu Xiaoyi who had experienced countless life and death situations. His temperament had been deeply engraved in the depths of his soul. His every move, every word, and every action would naturally reveal it inadvertently. In the several years of traveling together, when faced with complicated astronomical phenomena and the occasional attack of void beasts, the indifference in his indifference was completely different among the cultivators of the fruit plate. Even if he deliberately kept a low profile, he couldn't completely eliminate his essence. In fact, the people of the fruit plate weren't unfamiliar with this kind of cultivator. Many outsiders who passed by the fruit plate often had this kind of temperament. Although they didn't know his background, or even what the orthodoxy was, they knew that this was a strong cultivator who had survived in the cruel outside world. There was no mistake. Lu Xiaoyi also knew that the problem was with himself. This sharpness of his body couldn't be hidden just because he wanted to. It required the polishing of time, and it required a truly ordinary state of mind. It wasn't something that could be thrown into the crowd and become ordinary if he wanted to. However, it didn't matter. He had learned the basic Tao techniques of others, so it was only right for him to repay something. At least he could feel at ease in his heart. Since the nut world is blocked from the outside, where did the orthodoxy in this world come from? How do they cultivate? They can't just build a cart behind closed doors, right? Qing Lu smiled. It's the orthodoxy that was thrown in by the cultivators of the other realms in the fruit plate. The nut world was discovered tens of thousands of years ago, and there seemed to be spiritual opportunity inside. Therefore, the other realms, in order to help them, would randomly bestow upon them various orthodoxies when they invited the gods. There were Taoists, Buddhists, and all sorts of other orthodoxies. At that time, it was also to let them have the power to protect themselves. However, countless orthodoxies were thrown in, but only the body cultivation orthodoxy took root and sprouted. Perhaps it was because of the environment and race, but other orthodoxies simply couldn't be learned. Chapter 1542. As they hurried forward, Lu Xiaoyi more or less understood the reason behind the farce of the fruit platter inviting the gods. The Nut People's God invitation was a tradition that started about 10,000 years ago. At the beginning, it was for the good weather and peace of the country. This was a normal need in the human world. Since they couldn't leave the universe, they needed some kind of spiritual sustenance. This was the origin of the religion. In addition, there would be an earthquake every 300 years. Of course, the natives didn't understand that this was a natural phenomenon that occurred when the 36 cultivation realms of the fruit platter moved to a certain position. It wasn't that they did anything wrong. They didn't understand, so they could only place their fear in the unseen and ask for the blessings of the heavens. Most importantly, they really did receive the blessings of the heavens. At the very least, a god appeared. A god appeared in a shadowy third space. He had all the potential of a god. He could fly, he could summon clouds and rain, he could also pass down some lofty words. He could only be seen but not touched. He was high and mighty. This slowly became a tradition. Every 300 years, the Nut People would invite their own gods. After 10,000 years, they found that they could invite a total of 35 gods and no more. although they didn't understand the reason behind it. It became a habit. Later, each race had their own gods. Each profession also had their own gods. For example, the god of battle, the god of forging, the god of farming, the god of cooking, the god of four seasons, the god of wind and moon, etc. There were no rules. From the beginning, it was a mess. Later on, it became more casual. Because these gods were more gentle, they encouraged people to unite and help each other. Therefore, the humans in the nut realm lived a more harmonious life. Wars rarely happened. Big disputes were often resolved through the god invitation once every 300 years. In the eyes of the nut people, the place where the gods lived was a peaceful paradise on earth. However, they didn't know that it was just a bunch of laughing cultivators from the fruit platter pretending to be gods. For these cultivation realms of the fruit platter, every 300 years, they would casually send a true monarch to make up a story. Because of the isolation of the third space, how could the nut people know that they didn't invite a god every 300 years? Because of the favorable weather in the domain, such invitations became a joyous ceremony. The inviters treated it as a festive occasion, while the inviters treated it indifferently and went through the motions. It wasn't until the appearance of the crawling insects 1,000 years ago that the real test began. Not only was the combat ability of the natives tested, but it was also the ability of the heavenly deities they invited. Every great fruit plate realm can enter a third space and then pretend to be a god. Is that so? Speaking of which, what are gods like? Can one of you give me a demonstration? The banana people giggled. In the history of the nut world, cultivators from the outside world like them actually had the opportunity to spread knowledge of the outside world to the natives of the nut world, but they didn't know why no one had done this for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps there was also a sense of satisfaction in being regarded as a god. Since they couldn't come out anyway, they might as well maintain their yearning for the outside world. Why should they break their worship of the gods? Lu Xiaoyi thought of another question. Then, who can tell me, which god does our banana world play in the eyes of the nutman? Or does it not have a specific godhead, and it's whoever we bump into? Qing Lu didn't speak. Huang Daxian stammered. 10,000 years ago, when we started inviting gods, it didn't matter. It was whichever realm the cultivators bumped into. In fact, they couldn't recognize us. Later on, it was a little chaotic. After everyone discussed it, it was better to fix the heavenly deities played by each realm. It would be continuous and would also prevent chaos. Thus, each realm had its own fixed identity of a heavenly deity. Lu Xiaoyi waited for a long time, but no one told him the specific godhead of the banana world, so he laughed. Not talking? I know. Our godhead doesn't sound very nice. Huang Daxian was a little embarrassed. Our banana world joined the Great Fruit Plate Alliance a little late, so the nice-sounding and important godhead with a wide range of believers have been taken by other realms. In the end, when it came to us, there was only the godhead of rebirth left. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Godhead of rebirth? That's very nice. Isn't it important? It's very awesome. Is there a problem? Is it worth it for you to be so secretive? Qing Lu chimed in. Junior brother Yin, there are some things that you can't understand from a literal point of view. You don't know, but after we passed down the cultivation orthodoxy, the natives of the nut world finally chose the body meridian system that was most suitable for them. They also have some talent in the path of body cultivation. Most people in the world, regardless of gender, can basically enter the body cultivation path from birth. At the very least, they can reach the foundation establishment level. However, there are an extremely small number of people who can't even pass the minimum threshold of body cultivation. They are the type with the least cultivation potential and are seen as outliers in the realm. You also know that they have never lived in a cultivation world and don't know about the protection that cultivation realms give to mortals. Therefore, this extremely small number of people are in a difficult situation. Lu Xiaoyi nodded lightly. Humans were like this. If only a small number of people in a group had special abilities, they would often be able to bear the responsibility of protecting the entire group. However, if a large number of people in a group had special abilities and only a small number of people didn't, then this small number of people would be seen as a burden, and trash. They would affect the survival of the entire group and even the next generation. Those with damaged bloodlines and genes would be looked down upon. The nut world didn't have any contact with the outside world. Of course, they didn't know that being able to cultivate didn't mean everything. Without the help of the Great Fruit Plate Alliance and other realms, these so-called ability users were actually no different from trash. In a relatively closed realm, humans couldn't avoid some bad habits in their development. It was the same everywhere. If there were cultivators to guide them and they had enough vision of the outside world, this kind of situation would be very difficult to occur. Unfortunately, the nut world didn't have that. Qing Lu sighed. During the process of inviting the gods every 300 years, us impersonators would heavily remind them not to bully their own kind. It's not a big deal that they can't cultivate their body. This world needs all kinds of skills, and cultivation isn't the only one. As a result, these extremely small number of people who can't cultivate can still survive. It's just that it's a bit more difficult, and we can't do anything about it. There are people at the bottom everywhere. We've eliminated this kind of discrimination, but that kind of discrimination will still appear. Originally, all of this was a realm's evolution process, but the appearance of the Earth crawlers intensified this kind of discrimination. This is because in the resistance against the Earth crawlers, the only criterion is whether or not you have a strong body. For 300 years, we didn't have the time to remind them to pay attention to the living conditions of ordinary people who can't cultivate their body. Once they enter, it's a battle from beginning to end. You can imagine the pressure these ordinary people face to survive in this kind of worldwide battle. We entered the Great Fruit Plate Alliance relatively late, so in the final distribution of the God's Protection Group, we were assigned to this special group. Why is it called the God of Rebirth? It's because these people want to be reborn as soon as possible and get rid of their current predicament of being powerless. Chapter 1543. P.S. Double the last day at the end of the month. The ticket will be invalid once it expires. Old Fallen is still dangling in the dangerous 48th place. Everyone, help him and push him forward. Lu Xiaoyi and the group of banana people have been flying for 5 or 6 years. They all knew how big the fruit platter was. The only consolation was that although their course had deviated, at least they weren't flying backward and going back the way they came. They chatted and laughed along the way and didn't feel too much pressure. On the way, they also met chestnut people, apple people, and sweet potato people. Well, it seemed reasonable to treat sweet potatoes as a kind of fruit here. There were at least a few cultivators from each realm. There were Een Soul cultivators and Origin Soul cultivators, but the difference wasn't that big. Once they were chosen to enter the nut realm, they would enter a third space that was neither in the inner realm nor the outer realm. They would be able to cast spells from afar to help the nut realm. Due to the special nature of the third space, if you wanted to display more combat power, the direction of your spells was more important than your cultivation level. This was also the reason why the banana people dragged Lu Xiaoyi here. Cultivators like them who fought for their lives outside might not have basic theories, but their combat power was definitely good. When Lu Xiaoyi finally saw the nut realm, he realized that in the entire Fruit Platter Alliance, this was actually the smallest realm. It was pitifully small. Not even as small as the smallest of the 3,000 little Lu in Zhou. The reason why such a realm was passively recognized as one of the Fruit Platter Alliance was largely because of the number of 36 heavenly spirits. Cultivators believed in this very much. Moreover, when the 36 realms moved to a certain position and formed a certain totem pattern, there would be an obvious vibration linkage. It was a real cause and effect. They had to admit it. How many people are there? Are there tens of millions? Qing Lu replied, the nut realm is mostly barren. The actual habitable area is much smaller than imagined. There might only be 1 or 2 million people. Looking down from the sky, they could clearly see the human activities in the realm. Regardless of gender, old or young, high or low, they all seem to be gathering in one place. A stone mountain on the prairie. Why do they all have to come out, including the babies in swaddling clothes? Qing Lu sighed. Because among the 36 fruit plate realms, the nut realm is the one that shakes the most during the earthquake that occurs once every 300 years. At that time, all buildings would cease to exist, whether they were made of bricks, wood, or even underground. Therefore, there was actually no place to hide. Only by gathering together, regardless of gender or age, would it be easier to protect them. If they were scattered, they would only be attacked by the swarm one by one. Of course, it's also because they don't have many people. If they really have tens of millions of people, how can they organize? What's the sign of the end of the battle with the reptiles? Kill them all? Or some other way? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Qing Lu said seriously, "So far, we only know one way. It was to ensure that the human race would not collapse and be completely wiped out before the earthquake ended. These crawling insects were very strange. They would only appear during the earthquake for about 10 days. When the earthquake was over, they would burrow into the ground and disappear without a trace. We can't go in, so we don't know if they'll hibernate and wait for 300 years, or if they'll retreat through some tunnel. We also don't know if the crawling insects will be able to openly occupy the realm after the human race has been wiped out, or if the human race is strong enough to completely wipe them out. They won't come again? We've only experienced 3 waves of crawling insects before, so there are many things we don't know." Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Perhaps there was no other way. Because they couldn't enter the realm, many things couldn't be investigated on the spot, and many methods couldn't be used. With the nut realm's physical meridian ability, they couldn't do the theoretical analysis that could only be done with the Dharma meridian. There was a large group of cultivators surrounding the realm, and their group quickly joined in. Here, Lu Xiaoyi quickly figured out the procedure of pretending to be a god. The general process was that after the earthquake began, crawling insects would gradually appear. At this time, the nut realm's natives could start a ritual to invite a god. Their wishes would be transmitted to the divine realm through some mysterious method. Well, it was actually the void outside the realm, inviting the gods they believed in to pray for blessings. In the past, they prayed for blessings, but now they were asking for help. The third space was actually built by the natives through the power of their visions. In fact, it had nothing to do with the gods. How long the space could last depended entirely on the strength of the nut realm's natives' faith. Among the 35 gods, those who came early and had a wide audience could last longer in the third space, but those who weren't particularly eye-catching could last shorter. This had nothing to do with the strength of the gods, but only the intensity of the natives' visions. Historically, the one with the strongest vision was the first god to appear in the nut realm, the god of the hunt in the apple realm. In the early days of human development, hunting was the simplest and most direct way of survival, so it had a wide audience. Now, with the threat of the crawling insects, the god of the hunt was even more revered. His third space could often last as long as 7 or 8 days, while the others could last for as long as 3 or 4 days. The one with the fewest audience who lasted for as long as 1 day was the god of rebirth. It wasn't that they didn't believe in the gods, but these ordinary people who didn't have the ability to resist had been eaten by the insects. Since there was no one left, what kind of vision could they have? Qing Lu explained, when the vision arrives, the target will be the corresponding god's realm. For example, if those mortals who can't cultivate their bodies open their vision, they will choose a god among us banana cultivators. Everyone here will leave their god name in their vision and let them choose for themselves. That's about the procedure. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I thought you pulled me here just to push me in. How many choices do you have? If that's the case, you can't blame me if I can't get in, right? Qing Lu said helplessly. Junior brother Yin, you know very well that in the cultivation realm, it's taboo to only give one choice when communicating between mortals and cultivators. This is against the rules of the heavenly Tao. You have to give people the right to choose. Only then can you show the diversity and diversity of the heavenly Tao. How about this? There are 4 of us here, and we all have god names. You can also make a random one so that people can choose. Was this the name of the dish? Lu Xiaoyi knew very well why they didn't show their real names and how to make god names. In fact, they didn't want to get involved in karma. After all, this kind of thing couldn't be done in public. It was okay to make a joke, but if they showed their real names, it would be easy to be used against them. How could an insignificant human cultivator like you become a god and accept the faith of ignorant believers? What are your god names? Are they randomly chosen? Do they need to be consistent? Qing Lu pointed at the cultivators from the mountain Juju realm. Look at them. Their god names are Jinan Mountain, Pingjia Mountain, Chuyan Mountain, because there are many mountains in the mountain Juju realm. Over there in the watermelon realm, because of the developed water system, they're called weak water god, heavenly water god, Luo water god. In our banana realm, mine is Vaseline, yellow immortal is Formalin, and there's also wild bamboo forest. Vaseline? Formalin? Wild boar forest? What kind of nonsense was this? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Why do they all have the word Lin? Qing Lu explained, because our banana realm has the highest forest coverage. Chapter 1544. Juma Plain, Whitestone Mountain, these were the most solid places in the world. They didn't think so before, but ever since the insects appeared, this place had become the last stronghold of humanity. Because they had already experienced it 3 times before the earthquake arrived, the entire world population began to gather at Gemahara. They brought their families, the elderly and the young, the most basic necessities, and buried the most valuable things at home. They traveled thousands of miles to the last human stronghold, Whitestone Mountain. There might be some old people who couldn't travel far and stayed in their hometowns, but that was only a small portion. Most of the people here had strong bodies and cultivated body techniques. A journey of thousands of miles was nothing to them. They lived in a strange world. Every 300 years, there would be earthquakes, collapsing buildings, and shifting mountains and rivers. Now, there was an insect infestation. It was said that the world wasn't like this 1,000 years ago, but no one knew why it had become like this. Preparations had already begun a few years ago. Those who were powerful, influential, and wealthy had already arranged for their families, forces, and friends to come over. Thus, the current Whitestone Mountain, which was not very high, was actually a pyramid that represented everyone's identity. The Whitestone Mountain was not tall, only 1,000 feet tall. However, it had a strong foundation. The mountain was 1,000 feet tall, but the base of the mountain had a radius of 1,000 feet. It was not a mountain, but a slightly taller stone platform. The stone base was extremely deep, so for thousands of years, even if the world had quaked hundreds of times, this mountain had never shaken. It only felt the tremors as a whole, but there was no sign of it collapsing. Right now, the only difference between each person's identity on Whitestone Mountain was which area you could stay in. The central area was where only the noblest people in the world could stay. Who was the noblest? It was someone who could cultivate their body to the extreme, someone who could tear apart tigers and bears, someone who had the strength to pick up a mountain. In fact, from the perspective of the outer realm cultivators, only a small portion of people who could barely reach the level of a true lord could stay in the central area. The people here held the power to summon gods among the 35 gods. They were the core that decided the direction of the battle. Wherever they looked, that place would be safe. Otherwise, that place would be food for the crawlers. The central area was a bit worse. Strength, power, and wealth, you had to have one. They had the authority to summon 5 or 6 heavenly deities, so they had considerable strength. The elite area was much wider, and the composition was much more complicated. However, they were all people who were doing well in this world. They had strength, but were not at the top. They had authority, but were restrained. Even if they had money, they could only entertain themselves. They were the elite class, and also the main force in the fight against the crawlers. The people in the outer regions were the most numerous. In this world, there are close to 2 million people, and 1,500,000 of them belong to this category. They could cultivate physical techniques, but they stopped at the foundation establishment stage. This was because those who could reach the Gene Dance stage were all elites. In times of peace, they were the cornerstone of this world. In times of war, they were the largest group of cannon fodder. Although they were standing at the very front of the crawlers, they were still standing on white stones. They were barely within the range of Whitestone Mountain. If a fight really broke out, the elite forces of this world would occasionally cast their gazes over here and provide support without much thought. The only thing they could rely on was the 3 or 4 divine powers, and they had to use them at the most crucial moments. They didn't dare to be rash. However, there were people who were even more miserable than them. They were those who couldn't cultivate their physical techniques and had no achievements in their lives. They couldn't reach the foundation establishment stage, even if they cultivated their bodies for their entire lives. They were seen as burdens, trash, and a burden. They didn't even have the qualifications to stand on white stones. They could only form a camp in a certain direction beside Whitestone Mountain, hoping to receive help from the main body of this world when the war began. It was very humiliating, but it was better than staying in their hometown and being eaten by the crawlers. At least here, they had a chance to struggle. In the outer regions, they belonged to the low level of physical cultivators. They were identified as those who didn't have any potential for cultivation. There were a total of 100,000 people. They wandered alone in a corner of Whitestone Mountain, waiting for their tragic fate. These people had suffered more and more miserably in each of the 3 waves of crawlers. The first time, no one was prepared. They were the weakest, so of course, they suffered heavy casualties. The second time, everyone was somewhat prepared, but it wasn't enough. They weren't sure if they could use Whitestone Mountain as a base of resistance. They were still the biggest victims. The third time, everyone gathered at Whitestone Mountain, but they couldn't squeeze in. They became live targets in the outer regions. Almost all of them were wiped out. 300 years was enough for these leaks to grow a few more waves. At the very least, it proved that being unable to cultivate was not entirely a matter of bloodline, but a matter of probability. Among them, they were basically engaged in lowly professions, such as construction and doctors. Why was construction a lowly profession? Because no matter how much you built, you couldn't avoid the earthquake that happened once every 300 years. It would still shake you down and start all over again. Why were doctors lowly? Because everyone cultivated. If you were sick, it meant that you couldn't cultivate. Because of this, the traditions of normal mainstream society were completely reversed. This was the disadvantage of everyone being able to cultivate. In the face of the crawler wave, they were the first batch of people to be abandoned. In this world, just like Whitestone Mountain derangements, layer after layer of sacrifices, the noblest people were left behind in the end. You couldn't resist, because you were in the minority. You were a vine. You had to rely on a tree. But they were still organized, because the characteristic of humans was that when they were snobbish to the extreme, heroes of resistance would appear. The heroes were a group of physical cultivators at the level of yuanying. They weren't as scheming as perfected lords. When they stood up, they wouldn't be suppressed by their own circles. After all, they were strong. They were relatively young. They had their own thoughts. There would never be a lack of such existences among humans, just like there would never be a lack of spies when an enemy invaded. There were about 200 to 300 of these people. There were Yuanying and Jindan. They didn't hold much weight in the entire world's cultivation system. They didn't affect the foundation of the ruling class, and they could also show the sympathy of high-level powerhouses. Therefore, to a certain extent, they also obtained some recognition. It was also because of this group of people that they could possibly have a place at the edge of Whitestone Mountain. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have been able to obtain such a place. They didn't organize this group of people to achieve some goal of eliminating crawlers. How is that possible? These people couldn't even cut through the crawler's shell. They only wanted to prove that this world had human feelings. There were also people who were truly compassionate and would care about their survival, even if they were indeed trash. Chapter 1545. The 3 leading the group were Yuanying. They couldn't be considered to be from any orthodoxy, as they were all things thrown down by the so-called gods from the fruit platter thousands of years ago. They were all jumbled together, and no one knew which god's orthodoxy they had learned from. In any case, the gods themselves didn't care. Feng Ling Han was a man of striking appearance, and his actions were graceful. He was a distinguished and elegant character. In the orthodoxy of body meridians, there weren't many who could cultivate to such a level and still maintain such a graceful posture. He looked disdainfully at White Rock Mountain behind him and said righteously, "A bunch of scoundrels, only knowing how to hide on the mountain and watch. What a waste of your physique, yet you don't even dare to face a few insects." Standing beside him was a standard burly-bodied cultivator. He was 9 feet tall, with a leopard head and hoop ears. His upper body was bare, revealing his iron-like muscles. On his back was a huge machete, majestic and murderous. There are more than a few insects. Even if you want to show your fearlessness, you don't need to use such a method, right? The people on White Rock Mountain are indeed cowards, but at least they know how to count. His name was Long Xiong. Although he was also standing here, he had no feelings towards the sissy beside him. They were competitors. The goal of the competition was the 3rd place, Yuan Ying, a delicate and pretty girl, Qi Xiaomei. There was no dual cultivation here, but there were feelings. As a rare female body cultivator, Yuan Ying, being able to reach this step and still maintain her feminine charm was rare in this world. It was precisely because she was rare that she attracted countless prying eyes. Unfortunately, this girl was different from the rest. Although she was Yuan Ying and had the strength to stay in the Central Ring District, she never showed her disdain. However, she had never bothered to show her status in the Central Ring District. Since the day she started cultivating, she had been in close contact with these so-called powerless cultivators. Among the cultivators who helped these good-for-nothings, there were many who really wanted to win her favor because of their own ideals. Not only were there Yuan Ying cultivators, but there were also Jindan cultivators. Trapped in this world for tens of thousands of years, without any contact with the outside world, without any knowledge or hope, the cultivators here should not be called cultivators. Their state of mind was not broad enough. How could a person who had spent his whole life in a well compare to a person who often looked at the sea? Therefore, some things that seemed inconceivable to cultivators in the outside world were very normal inside the nut. For example, 2 nascent soul cultivators were fighting over a woman. At the end of the day, it was just to reproduce and establish a family so that they could have a good bloodline. Everyone had a purpose. If there was no purpose, it would be instinctive. Although these 2 men also had a purpose because of their instincts, they were still a helping hand. Qi Xiaomei's inheritance was also the body meridian inheritance. However, she had also read many Taoist jade slips and books in addition to the body meridian inheritance. These pure Taoist things were very rare now. This was because the gods outside no longer imparted Taoist thoughts to the realm. No one listened, no one believed, and no one practiced. What was the use of imparting? However, tens of thousands of years ago, when the direction of cultivation in this world had not yet been determined, there were still some such inheritances. Because no one practiced them, they gradually declined. Qi Xiaomei saw some by chance and thought deeply about it. Therefore, her way of thinking was somewhat incompatible with others. She did what she thought she should do and did not care about anything else. As the leader of these ordinary mortals, no one had actually conferred this position upon her. It was only because of the long period of contact that these so-called mortal body refinement warriors had developed a sense of respect for her. After a long time, even if no one had suggested anything, she had naturally become the spokesperson of these people. Of course, she was not the only cultivator with such thoughts. Among the cultivators with her, most of them also had their own thoughts. They were not like Feng Ling Han and Lao Xiong, who had their own personal goals. As an accomplished cultivator, she could clearly feel that the tremors under her feet were slowly intensifying. She knew that when this earthquake reached a certain level, terrifying crawling insects would appear and cover the sky and earth. Even if most of the nearly 2 million people in this world practice body techniques, they would still pale in comparison to the number of crawling insects. Once these crawling insects burrowed out of the ground, they would follow the scent of humans and gather more and more. Whitestone Mountain was the destination and goal of all the crawling insects. It was hard to say whether it was the best idea for everyone to gather together. This would instead attract the crawling insects faster. However, compared to spreading out and resisting, choosing the lesser of two evils was probably the only way. All the humans in this world had gathered here. They had been waiting here for several months. This kind of waiting made people despair because they were not waiting for hope, but for death. After the first 3 waves of crawling insects, more than half of the population had died each time. Who could guarantee that they would be the lucky one if they had to choose one out of 2? Of course, the death rate in the periphery of Whitestone Mountain was higher. As long as the humans in the center were not extinct, they would usually have the last laugh. Among the 100,000 people behind her, it would be nonsense to say that everyone was weak. Even if they were body cultivators who could not build their foundation, they were still much stronger than ordinary mortals. The problem was that there were no ordinary mortals here, so they were just ordinary mortals. Their little bit of strength was not a problem in normal life, but in front of the crawling insects with tough skin and thick flesh, it was all a problem. Don't be fooled by the fact that they were all armed with sabers and axes. Even if they swung their sabers and axes, they might not even be able to split open the crawling insect's shell. Even if it was useless, they still had to make arrangements. The stronger ones were in the periphery. Inside were women, children, and the elderly. She had repeatedly suggested that these people who did not have the ability to protect themselves be arranged into Whitestone Mountain, but she was ruthlessly rejected by the higher-ups. It was very cruel, but they had their reasons. Being weak did not mean being kind. Secondly, during the 3rd wave of insects, these people who did not have the ability to resist were arranged into Whitestone Mountain. However, the strong people who stayed behind reported that as soon as they saw the insect wave, they immediately collapsed without any organization. This was because they no longer had any worries. Therefore, during the 4th wave of insects, the higher-ups refused to provide shelter for these people. If they wanted to protect their families, they had to do it themselves. Everyone had to do their best so that there would be hope in this world. Others would protect your family, but you had to run away yourself. What are you thinking? These 200 or so cultivators with some strength all volunteered to provide protection for these ordinary mortals. However, to what extent such protection could be achieved, only God knew. In fact, Chi Xiaomei was very clear in her heart that they might be able to withstand the harassment of a small group of crawling insects. However, once they gained a little momentum, they would definitely be defeated. Clearly knowing, but having to do it, this was the Taoist principle of what to do and what not to do. It might be very stupid, but if you could survive such stupidity, it would be a different world for the individual. She believed in this, so she persevered. Chapter 1546. The earthquake became more and more frequent until one day, even the people on Whitestone Mountain could feel the shaking. They could hear the dull sound of plates colliding with each other from afar. Flames and smoke rose continuously from afar. On the west side of Whitestone Mountain, a large white fog covered half the sky. That was where the lava flowed into the river after the eruption of the volcano. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Fortunately, they were still experienced and knew that this was not the end of the world. Although the weather was terrifying, if the humans could survive these 10 days, they would have another 300 years of good days to live. The first earthcrawler appeared in the sight of the humans on Whitestone Mountain. It was immediately killed by human cultivators, which attracted countless cheers. It was as if victory was right in front of them. This was a kind of self-consolation and encouragement. Soon, the humans would not be able to cheer anymore. After the first earthcrawler appeared, there was a second one, a third one, and then a small group. Countless small groups of human cultivators tried their best to kill the earthcrawlers. At the beginning, it was easy, but later on, they needed to concentrate their strength. After a day, they could only attack and defend against the earth crawlers. When a large number of earth crawlers began to gather here, the small groups of human cultivators began to retreat to Whitestone Mountain. This represented the official beginning of the earth crawler tide. However, it had only lasted for a day. There was still a long way to go before the end of the 10 days of the earthquake. The entire Whitestone Mountain entered the strictest state of alert. The higher-ups in the central area and the central area also stood at the forefront of the resistance. They were qualified to protect their relatively weak families, but they had to stand up. This was a kind of exchange. Other than leaving a few mobile forces to block the whole, the remaining cultivators, regardless of their realm, all stood at the foot of Whitestone Mountain. The stronger ones stood at the front, while the weaker ones stood at the back. In this sense, their cultivation was not in vain. They knew what they had to do. They knew that, as a whole, if Whitestone Mountain was breached in any direction, it would be the end of the human race. Their strength could not be left behind. Humans could still support each other if they gathered together. Once Whitestone Mountain was breached, everyone would run away. In front of the sea of earth crawlers, there would be no chance at all. This was also what the gods had repeatedly asked them to do. Gathering together, giving each other warmth, and helping each other, with the help of the gods in the third space above, was the only way to protect the hope of the human race. None of them were stupid, and they all understood. Therefore, no one dared to shrink back. Only one group of people was forgotten, the 100,000 ordinary mortals outside of Whitestone Mountain. The huge Whitestone Mountain could, of course, hold a mere 100,000 people. However, it could only hold people, not people's hearts. What right did a community that didn't contribute anything have to be sacrificed for them? This wasn't just one person's disdain, but the majority of people's disdain. Therefore, stopping outside Whitestone Mountain was the only place they could stay. As a protruding part of the human race, it would naturally attract the attacks of the crawlers. The cultivators of Whitestone Mountain could make use of this to achieve some tactical goals. In any case, their deaths were worth it. However, the crawling insect tide this time was different from the previous three. When the overwhelming wave of reptiles rolled in, they did not attack immediately. Instead, they gathered at the periphery, as if waiting for something. The higher-ups of the human race on Whitestone Mountain felt uneasy. If the crawling insect tide was as undisciplined as before, it would be a good thing for the human race. However, if they were organized, had tactics, and had endless numbers, the thing they were most worried about still happened. Amidst the shrieks of the crawlers, a round ball several hundred feet tall was rolled over by the crawlers. Even if the Nutman had never heard of or seen such a thing before, it didn't mean that he didn't know what it was. It was an insect nest. This thing was laughable in the eyes of the cultivators from outer space. How could a honeycomb several hundred feet in diameter be called a nest? It was nothing in the void. However, considering that this thing only existed on the ground, and considering the Nutman's strength, this insect nest was somewhat terrifying. The worst thing was that they had no experience with this. If there was an insect nest, there would definitely be an insect queen. Then, after this earthquake, would the crawlers still disappear? That was the question. The gods could only help them in these 10 days. If they couldn't deal with the insect nest during this time, would there still be humans in this world when they could invite the gods again in 300 years? Uneasiness spread. The insect nest stopped 100 miles away at the edge of Whitestone Plain. Then, the crawlers began their frenzied attack. There was no need to think about it anymore. They had to deal with Zerd's attack first. Strictly speaking, the crawlers weren't much stronger than humans in terms of individual strength. There weren't many powerful crawlers, but their strength lay in the fact that they were boundless and didn't fear death. In their simple minds, there was no concept of death at all. A human practitioner could easily kill several crawlers that were as strong as him. But then what? He would be covered by the swarm, piled up, and after the crawlers crawled over him, not even a single bone would be left. Fortunately, they couldn't fly, otherwise Whitestone Mountain wouldn't even last a day. The battle reached its climax as soon as it started. The Nutman had no choice but to summon the gods at once. Gradually, the number increased from 2, 3, and finally 7, 8. This included the most respected god of the hunt. The gods appeared in the sky above Whitestone Mountain. They were clearly visible, but their bodies seemed to be encased in a huge air bubble. Some of them swooped down and used all kinds of ice cones, wind blades, water arrows, rolling stones, and with thorns to form a spell storm. Some used large-scale forbidden spells to kill the crawlers in their path. This was the consensus of the gods. Since there were still a few days left, it was obviously not appropriate to keep using forbidden spells. On the contrary, the simplest basic attacks were the most sustainable because the opponent wouldn't disappear just because you used a forbidden spell. They still had countless companions charging forward. This wasn't a battlefield where one could only use one attack. It was a battle of endurance, willpower, and endurance. It was precisely because of this reason that it was impossible to wipe out all the crawlers with basic spells. There would always be a small number of strong, powerful, or lucky ones that would continue to charge through the storm. They would be dealt with by the Nutman. This was the cooperation between humans. It was too wasteful to let the gods kill the crawlers individually. The god spells were more suitable for dealing with enemies in a large area. The crawlers' attacks were scattered in several directions around Whitestone Mountain. Each god was responsible for a part of the mountain, barely maintaining a balance. There were still more than 20 gods that could be summoned, but considering the duration of time, it was obviously unwise to summon all of them now. If they couldn't eliminate the crawlers, how could they survive the last period of the earthquake? The battle was extremely fierce from the beginning. From this point alone, the humans' performance wasn't bad. Chapter 1547. 3 days later, there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood around Whitestone Mountain. However, this did not affect the crawlers at all. Instead, it made them even more violent. They ate the corpses of their own kind and continued to move forward after they were full. Their numbers were still endless, just like before the battle. However, the ground crawlers' attack was very different from the previous 3 times. In the past, they attacked from all directions without any blind spots. This time, they focused on a few directions. The advantage was that the humans were under more pressure in these few directions. The disadvantage was that the humans could easily defend against the ground crawlers' attacks in those directions that were not focused on. They only needed to deal with the stragglers and stragglers. What was most inconceivable was that the 100,000 ordinary mortals who had left the range of Whitestone Mountain unexpectedly did not suffer much attack. 3 days had passed, but the crawlers did not show any interest in them. It was as if they did not see them, even if they were actually the easiest part to destroy. This must be the intention of the crawler's brain. No one knew why, and no one could understand Zerg's way of thinking. The few body cultivators with the highest status among the humans stood at the highest point of Whitestone Mountain. The situation at the foot of the mountain was vivid in their eyes. They were very worried because this attack by the crawlers was different from the previous ones. There was a very simple reason. If they did not decipher the intention of the crawlers now, they might not be able to deal with it when the real change began. One of the cultivators had a serious expression. So far, we have summoned 13 sky gods to barely stop the attack of the crawlers. 4 sky gods have already left because of the exhaustion of the power of vision. At this rate, we might not be able to resist the final attack of the crawlers. In a few days, it will be the last time most of the sky gods will stay. At this rate, I doubt we can last 10 days. Another cultivator said, "The crawler's intention is unclear. This is suspicious. We should take the initiative to attack and observe their reaction, not wait passively, especially in the area where the ordinary people are. If the crawlers are not attacking, what are they waiting for? I think that since they are not moving, we should move first. We should try to attack to see their intention. It doesn't matter if we fail. After all, they're just ordinary people who are not worth mentioning." A few of the top decision-makers had discussed and decided to attack the 100,000 ordinary humans. This was very cruel because these ordinary humans did not have the ability to attack. However, to the top decision-makers, this was a huge game of chess. There would definitely be pawns that would be abandoned. Over the past 3 days, the loss of humanity's main forces had exceeded 100,000. There was no reason for these ordinary mortals to be so leisurely. In a great war, no one would be spared. This was fate. When the order was passed down, Qi Xiaomei was silent. Emotionally, she could not accept such an arrangement, but logically, this was indeed part of the strategy. Someone had to go out and test the waters. If it did not go, then who should go? This order was issued to ordinary mortals. In fact, it did not include cultivators like them. This was a voluntary issue. The higher-ups had already taken this into consideration. Don't you care about the common people? Then in the current situation, are you so-called moral guardians willing to continue protecting ordinary mortals? After passing this order to the cultivators, Qi Xiaomei didn't want to force anyone. In the past, more than half of the swarm died, especially in the latter half. So we have to make a choice. Should we sacrifice ourselves now, or wait a few more days? I choose now. As for you, you have the right to choose. I will not force you. More than 200 cultivators were silent. They understood very well that if they rushed out and got trapped in the swarm, they would definitely die. However, retreating into Baisher Mountain might not be the same. In the past, more than half of the people had died, but there was one thing that was true. Most of the people who died were those who were not strong enough. Feng Linghan sighed. Xiaomei, why do you have to do this? As long as there's life, there's hope. You shouldn't die here at your age. Qi Xiaomei was unmoved. Seeing that his persuasion was fruitless, Feng Linghan's cherishing of life defeated his feelings. He left sadly. Gao Xiong wanted to behave differently from his competitors, but if the price was his life, he would not insist. This was a difference in ideals. In the end, they were not Qi Xiaomei. As the two of them left, some cultivators followed one after another. In the end, less than 100 people were left out of more than 200. These are people who truly had some kind of belief, but how difficult was it to stick to one's beliefs? Among the 100,000 people, 30,000 old and young were allowed to enter Baisher Mountain. This was the price for attacking. Even the higher-ups of Nut Mountain could not drive these old and weak women and children to their deaths. At the same time, 2 reserve teams were quietly transferred over. Their role was not to protect this team that was bound to die, but to attack under certain circumstances and supervise the battle. In war, one could not be merciful. This was the responsibility of every adult, regardless of whether one had the ability or not. Especially in this kind of competition between groups, every group had to fulfill their responsibilities. Qi Xiaomei gathered the 100 cultivators around her. They would act as the arrowheads until all of them fell. This was the only thing she could do. Her voice condensed into a line, facing the 70 to 80,000 people behind her, whose eyes were filled with despair. I will protect you, but I can't do it forever. What I am protecting is your dignity, not your bodies. We will treat you equally, and no one has the right to hide in the back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. You are also a member of this world, and you also have the obligation to sacrifice for this world. Regardless of whether you are strong or weak, regardless of whether you can cultivate, what I can do for you is to let your old and children enter Baisher Mountain. As for you, we can only fight, and we must fight. No one can escape. If we rush out of the reptiles' conspiracy, then some of us may still be able to survive. But if we are just a mass of loose sand, the result is destined. Now, please invite out your god. A group like this who could not cultivate had basically been wiped out in the previous 3 battles with Zerg. But this time, at least some of the old, weak, women, and children were temporarily safe. Moreover, they could die in the process of charging, instead of dying without dignity while being chased by the swarm of insects. This was already the best result. Even among those who were in Baisher Mountain, how many of them could escape this disaster in the end? At least, they had a purpose in dying this time. The god of their group was called the god of rebirth. It was very reasonable. Weren't they a group of people waiting for rebirth? Under the prayers of more than 100,000 people, visions gathered. Because it was a request of certain death, There was a lot of resentment that pierced through the sky. Soon, the names of the four gods appeared in their visions. Vaseline, Formalin, Wild Bamboo Forest, Gatling Gun. Ordinary mortals did not know much about the names of these gods. They gave the right to choose to Qi Xiaomei. She also did not know much about these gods, but in her impression, the first three names seemed to have appeared in the last war, and their performance was very ordinary. Then, should they choose a new god this time? Chapter 1548. Soon, just like the other gods, a large transparent bubble appeared in the sky above White Rock Mountain. There was a human figure inside, and from his appearance, he did not look much different from the other gods. Qi Xiaomei was entrusted by the others to communicate with the gods. In fact, she could not go too deep, so she could only skim the surface. We incompetent people rashly asked the great god to come out because Zerg is wreaking havoc, and there is no way to fight against him. Today, we 70,000 soldiers will launch a counterattack against Zerg. Please take care of us along the way. The great god Gatling did not react, as if he did not care about what they wanted to do. He only made a soft sound and did not continue. So Qi Xiaomei had to ask for more details. What abilities does the great god have? What methods are you good at? Please tell me so that I can arrange these people to cooperate with you. Distant fire. The great god Gatling said inexplicably. Distant fire? What did that mean? Setting fire from afar? For these reptiles, setting fire was not a good idea. Their vitality was amazing, and ordinary fire could not burn them immediately. Instead, the fire would burn them even more fiercely. This had already happened in the battle a few days ago. However, she did not dare to casually question the great god. Even if he set fire, it was better than nothing. Besides, the great god was good at this, so she could not make him change on the spot. Thus, she continued to ask, "When we attack later, please don't rush too fast. Our strength is limited, and I'm afraid we can't keep up with your pace." The gods could move around a limited amount in their shield. In principle, wherever the believers went, the gods could follow and stay above the team. What Qi Xiaomei meant was that if he ran too fast, he might be separated from the team. Not only would he not be able to help these people, but he would also easily lose the support of his vision. Without the support of his vision, the gods would be fine. At most, they would return to their original world, but these people would be in trouble without the help of the gods. Only the heavens knew how long they could last. The great god Gatling was a little impatient. "Go ahead yourselves. I'll stay here at White Rock Mountain and not go anywhere." Qi Xiaomei was sad when she heard this. When it rains, it pours. Such a tired army had to encounter such an irresponsible god. You're in the shield, and there's no danger, so why are you so scared? The god should be with the believers of the team. This was the source of the vision. This Gatling was a cowardly god, and it was not advisable to do so. If he was too far away from the team, he might be sent back to his original world. But considering that there were still 30 to 40,000 old, weak, women, and children in their team at Whitestone Mountain, it seemed to be possible. A heavenly god who didn't dare to personally step onto the battlefield, who didn't dare to come into close contact with the cruelty of the battlefield, even if he was actually very safe. Distant fire? It turned out that they were setting the fire from afar. There was nothing they could do. Mortals like them did not have the right to ask the gods to do anything. They could only accept it passively. However, he couldn't say that to the teams below. He still had to cheer them up. "We just need to move forward, and Gatling will protect us all the way." Little sister Qi never lied, but at the end of her life, she had to lie to the public. Standing here, it was as if all of the misfortune in the world had fallen upon them. If they had known that this would happen, they would have invited a familiar heavenly deity. Although the help would be limited, at least the heavenly deity would be reliable. The heavenly deity would be able to follow them forward. After all, it was completely different whether or not there was a heavenly deity protecting them all the way. It was not only a practical guarantee, but also a source of confidence. If she saw the heavenly deity, she had invited, still hanging around Whitestone Mountain while they were charging, she didn't dare to imagine what would happen. The time had come. They had already wasted too much time. With a whistling sound, little sister Chi led the team forward. At first, they had to slow down because there would always be cowards behind them. However, these people were destined to be the first to die. Not only would they be attacked by the reptiles, but they would also be punished by the law enforcement of the two supervising teams behind them. Slowly, they ran faster and faster in fear, under the gaze of countless reptiles around them. It would be a lie to say that they were not afraid. To them, the only way was to gather together, shout loudly, and wave the weapons in their hands in vain. It was as if this could scare away the foreign species that were eyeing them covetously. In the distance, the swarm of insects was dense and dark. Even the swarm did not come out to meet the enemy. It was as if they had long known that this was a group of two-legged reptiles who were outwardly fierce but inwardly timid. Obviously, there were reptile dispatchers who knew the composition of the various human tribes very well. Behind this team, there were two teams of cultivators, each with 10,000 people. They were responsible for driving away the law enforcement and were also responsible for improvising. Together, their purpose was to test the reaction of the swarm and the intelligence of the leader of the swarm. From this, they could determine the subsequent tactics. Sending out 100,000 people to test the waters out of nearly 2 million humans was a good tactic, although the absolute number was a bit large. The leaders of the human race stood at the top of Whitestone Mountain, closely observing the changes below. One of the Supremes said worriedly. One of them said worriedly, "The two teams of cultivators are following too closely. They should have put some distance between them." Another true Lord sighed. It's not that they're following too closely. It's that the ones in front are rushing too slowly. They're scared. There are many who have fallen behind. If they don't kill them, they won't be able to suppress the situation. I'm just afraid. What you're afraid of will happen. The reptiles that were attacking the area suddenly split into two groups, one from the left and the other from the right. Their movements were fast and powerful, and in an instant, the ordinary mortal teams that had rushed out, including the two overseers, were cut off from returning. They were planning to make dumplings. Zerg's tactical ability was quite good. He turned the humans probing into meat buns to beat dogs. Quick, summon the gods. We have to at least bring those two teams back. They shouldn't fall into the swarm and be torn apart. It was too late. The reptiles swarmed in, filling the gap left by the three teams. Not to mention the mobilization of Whitestone Mountain, the two supervising teams immediately fell into a dilemma. Qi Xiaomei couldn't see this. Her eyes were only focused on the front. She didn't care about what was happening behind her. The human camp was originally less than 5 kilometers away from the swarm. They had been charging for a while, running faster and faster. Compared to the reptiles on the left and right, it seemed that only the front was more spacious. Why weren't they setting fire? This was Qi Xiaomei's question. Fire elemental spells needed time to burn the swarm to death. It would be meaningless if they set fire too late. Could it be that they would also rush into the fire and face the ferocious insects that had been burned until they were wild? They had been fooled by that Gatling god. Qi Xiaomei was completely disappointed when she saw that they were less than 1 kilometer away from the dense swarm of insects in front of them, and that there was still no movement. Even if she had the cultivation of a Yuanying, how many could she kill in such a dense swarm? This was a purely suicidal action. For the first time, she regretted her stupidity. The entire operation was like an operation by the higher-ups and the gods to deliberately bury ordinary people, driving them into the pit and then abandoning them. They were only 1,000 feet away. At such a close distance, it was impossible for them to receive any help from the gods. Qi Xiaomei didn't have time to think about this Gatling's abnormality. She only focused on the front and wanted to see how many insects she could kill to break even. This included the cultivators beside her. No one had expected such a change. It greatly reduced their courage in the end. There were only a few hundred feet left. She raised the steel sword in her hand. Her mood finally changed from the initial apprehension of the charge to the later uneasiness, then fear, and finally the calm before death. It was also at this moment that whooshing sounds came from above. They became more and more frequent, from a line to a large area. Chapter 1549. Little Sister Chi couldn't figure out what was passing over her head for a while. The only thing she knew was that the crawling insects in front of her were like straw, cut down by an invisible scythe. She ran mechanically, but found that she was a little further away from the swarm of crawling insects in front of her, from 100 feet to 100 feet. It wasn't that the crawling insects had retreated, but that they had fallen. The wide front in front of her seemed to be dragged back and forth by the Grim Reaper's scythe. She couldn't help but speed up because there wasn't a single crawling insect standing in front of her. The calmness just now was gone, and what followed was a rekindled desire to kill in her heart. She hadn't made a sound during the charge because she felt that it was a manifestation of fear. But now, she couldn't help but start shouting, just like her cultivation companions. They had circled around the gates of hell, and now they were back. This was the difference between life and death. Only when they understood death would they cherish life more. The most amazing thing was that the gates of hell seemed to be getting further and further away from them. She finally understood what it meant to fire from afar. It didn't mean to set fire from afar, but to attack from afar. She shouted herself hoarse, "Charge faster! Keep up! We have to at least keep up with the great god's attack speed. This is our battle. It's too shameful if we don't kill a single insect." His fellow cultivators behind him reacted and began to charge forward frantically. To be honest, charging forward was the safest way, because only where the scythe of the Grim Reaper had been swung was a place where there were no crawlers. They charged, and the 70,000 ordinary body cultivators behind them also charged. They had no choice. There were crawling insects all around them, and only in front of them were their companions. Not to mention killing the insects, they had to charge for their lives. The two supervising teams behind had no choice but to charge because they couldn't go back. This was completely out of the scope of the mission they had accepted. They hadn't figured out the intention of the swarm, and their escape route had been cut off. But the strange thing was that this group of ordinary people was charging forward at an even faster speed. This shouldn't be. They should have already started fighting with the crawling insects. They were now standing in the swarm's former camp. But why hadn't their attacks been blocked? How could a mere 100 body cultivators lead a group of weak, ordinary people forward? After all, they were all body cultivators who were at least at the foundation establishment stage. When they really started running, they were still much faster than ordinary people. Therefore, they chased from the back of the group to the middle of the group and then to the front of the group. Suddenly, their vision opened up. They were shocked to find that Qi Xiaomei and the others were not fighting at all, but running nonstop. He didn't fight not because he was timid, but because he couldn't reach it. Dozens of feet in front of them, swishing sounds filled the sky, sweeping away all the insects that dared to block their path. Qi Xiaomei, what the hell are you doing? What the hell is going on? The true monarch body cultivator who was supervising the battle roared. Qi Xiaomei immediately shouted back, "It's Gatling God's distant fire. Don't ask me what happened, because I don't know either. You just King follow them." In their mad dash, they finally saw clearly what distant fire was. They were flying swords, tens of thousands of them, uncountable. They joined together to form a river, from left to right, and then from right to left, they swept in a fan shape, clearing out an insect-free zone that was thousands of feet wide in front of them. They only needed to follow behind and run in the insect-free zone that appeared. The insect-free zone was extending forward. The tens of thousands of body cultivators who were charging at the front couldn't even touch a single insect. When the fierce and cruel battle that they had imagined turned into a strange run, no one expected that this charge of certain death would turn out like this. Damn it! Where are we rushing to? Did you set the direction? The body cultivator true monarch was still chattering. Qi Xiaomei completely abandoned the shackles of her realm. I don't know. Do you think I can control the guidance of the gods? Just follow them until the distant fire disappears. Or are you willing to open up an attack route alone? Of course, they couldn't see because they were in chaos and couldn't fly. However, there were still people on the battlefield who could see. Although Whitestone Mountain was only 1,000 feet high, they could still see very far in the flat land of the barren plains. They're heading toward the insect nest. Is it the will of the great god Rebirth? Or is it that little sisters? A true monarch asked. The change was sudden and full of ups and downs. They had fallen into a desperate situation at the beginning, but now the situation had taken a turn for the better. After all, they were cultivators. They could see some kind of opportunity in such a change. Most importantly, the other gods who were helping to defend Whitestone Mountain had also raised their own opinions. There was only one core, counterattack. To them, there were too many things to consider. How long could this Gatling last? How would occupying or destroying the insect nest affect the insect swarm? It was obviously impossible for the entire Whitestone Mountain to attack. Then, how could they achieve a balance between offense and defense? Should they summon all the gods at once? After all, this was a fight for a world, a race's life and death. It wasn't a gamble where they could start over if they lost. A true monarch said faintly, once every 300 years. Who would be willing to start over? Live in fear forever, waiting for death to come? Those who die in front of the insect swarm all think that it's their karma. If this mentality continues, what hope does our world have? Now, we have the help of the gods, but we don't dare to gamble. If there comes a day when even the gods abandon us, then we can only become food for the insects. The decision was finally made. In the Fourth Great War between humans and insects, the Nutter Man decided to gamble his future. This was also in line with the gods' thoughts. In the end, the humans of Whitestone Mountain were divided into two groups. 500,000 of them would follow the path that had already been opened to take the insect nest. The remaining 1,000,000 would guard Whitestone Mountain, protecting those who weren't good at fighting the elderly and the children. Although it was a little late to send out all the elites, they had still taken this step. All the remaining gods were invited out. Since they were going to gamble, they had to gamble thoroughly. What was the use of leaving a few people behind? Would they be able to stop the insect swarm if they failed? This was the 4th day after the war began. According to the usual practice, the earthquake would still be long before it ended. However, the humans had already decided to stake everything on this one throw, hoping to solve this problem once and for all. If the insect nest was really the source of evil, then their gamble was meaningful. After all, as the true monarch had said, no one was willing to endure all this every 300 years. Morale could be used, because there was hope, because thousands of years of grievances, because their home had been ruined by the insects. This kind of attack didn't need to be mobilized. Attacking was far more in line with the wishes of most people than defending here. Chapter 1550. The fire had never stopped since the beginning, nor did it show any signs of exhaustion. It was as if the Grim Reaper didn't know fatigue. White Rock Mountain was less than 100 miles away from the hive. When this patchwork group crossed 60 to 70 miles, the hive finally began to retreat under the push of the insects. This was a signal that strengthened the Nut Man's determination to fight back. In fact, it was precisely because of the danger of the hive being attacked that the insects' attacks on White Rock Mountain were much weaker than before. The remaining cultivators made a bold decision to send another 300,000 people to chase after the hive. This was a very wise decision because the wind had changed. However, as the vanguard of the assault, Little Sister Chi, her army of ordinary people, and the two supervising teams were still at the front. They were also the closest to the hive. The human army behind them was still too far away to catch up, so they were still the decisive factor. Among them, the two teams of 10,000 people were the real assault force. This was a fact that could never be changed. After the perfected cultivator made a judgment of the overall situation, he made a decision. However, He had to respect the opinion of the woman in front of him because everything had started with her. She was the one who had organized this army of ordinary people. She was the one who had charged forward without hesitation. And she was the one who had chosen the sky god, even if she was just a yuanying body cultivator. Little sister, the hive is retreating. At this rate, we'll probably never catch up to the hive, so we have to make a choice. Do we still care about these ordinary people? Or do we charge forward with 20,000 light cavalry? This is related to the future of this world. Maybe 300 years, maybe 3,000 years, or even more. You have to make a choice. Little sister Chi sighed inwardly. These ordinary people had been with her for so long, but they were still burdens that she had to get rid of. This made her feel very conflicted. However, this was the growth of a cultivator. Before, she had insisted on not giving up, but now she had to give up. This was the process of sublimation. In fact, no matter who it was, ordinary people or cultivators, in the current situation, anyone who couldn't keep up was destined to be abandoned. There was no favoritism. For the sake of the Nutman's future, anyone could give up. The perfected cultivator tried his best to dispel her concerns. Little sister, the situation is different from before. Even if we give up on them, they will suffer great damage, but they won't be completely wiped out. Reptiles' main force will be focused on our pursuit, and then on the army behind us, but they will not be focused on them. Everyone is sacrificing themselves. Not only them, but also us. Little sister Chi let out a long sigh. You're right. We shouldn't care about the speed of these ordinary people. We should speed up. Catching up to the hive is the most important thing. We're the closest to it, so it's our responsibility. At this moment, little sister Chi had finally completed the sublimation of her state of mind. She had changed from an angry girl to a mature cultivator. It could also be said that she had finally been dragged down by the evil cultivation world, sacrificing the interests of a small group for the sake of a larger group. This was how humans progressed. The 20,000 human cultivators began accelerating at full speed. Soon, the 70,000 ordinary people were left behind as they were gradually devoured by the reptiles that surrounded them. This was fate. In a battle between different races, no insect would care if you were an ordinary person or not. Obviously, the Gatling god had sensed their change. Because there was no longer a need to maintain a wide clearing area, only enough space for 20,000 people to attack. The speed of the clearing increased correspondingly, and they rushed towards the hive together with the humans in front. The distance was gradually closing. Because of the reptiles' desperate resistance, the Grim Reaper's scythe began to appear one after another. The humans had to deal with them themselves. This was the price to pay for quickly approaching the hive. There was no victory without a price to pay. The Gatling, well, it was actually Lu Xiaoyi calmly observing the situation below. He tried his best to make his fire as sharp as possible. In a battle with creatures like insects, he would never hold back. This was the tradition of Xianyuan swordsmen. This third space was very magical. It was a combination of the space door and the power of faith. His current attack on the reptiles was actually an attack on another space creature. This was the first time he had used such an attack method. This meant that if he could completely master this method, he wouldn't need to follow his opponents into the space door in the future. It would be dangerous and his cultivation would be weakened. He only needed to follow them in with his flying sword. This was the difference between a swordsman and a big fruit platter cultivator. It was difficult for them to realize that things that were common in the nut world could actually play a big role in battle. Of course, this required two prerequisites: understanding the space door and mastering the power of faith. Coincidentally, he had dabbled in both aspects. Therefore, once the cultivator with a large fruit platter left the special environment of the nut realm, he would no longer be able to attack another space. However, he managed to figure out a few things from his experience, and after perfecting them in the future, they would have miraculous effects against opponents who used the power of space in front of him. It was also because he had dabbled in both aspects that the power of his attacks after passing through another space was much weaker than that of the big fruit platter cultivator. Therefore, they couldn't cause too much fatal damage to the reptiles, but he, the Gatling, could. This was because his attacks had a 60% to 70% chance of passing through. After he mastered it in the future, there was still room for improvement. He didn't expect to have such an opportunity after pretending to be a god here. That was why it was said that cultivators shouldn't be afraid of things when traveling. If you hid from everything, you might end up hiding from your own destiny. He was very sure that the nest was the reptile's Achilles heel. He didn't know how these reptiles were related to the real Zerg in the void. Were they relatives? However, there were some things that they had in common. At the very least, reptiles with a nest would fight to the death. Without a nest, they would still be afraid, and run away. This was the key to solving the problem. Therefore, from the very beginning, his Gatling had pointed out the direction for them. Although this team was very weak, he couldn't do anything about it. This wasn't something he could influence. There would always be sacrifices, cultivators, and those who couldn't cultivate. In the face of such a disaster, no one deserved special treatment. It was cruel, but you couldn't change it. Fortunately, these nut people finally understood and started to fight back. This was what he wanted to tell them. However, you couldn't use words to encourage them. That was useless. All you could do was let them see hope and be willing. This was the correct way to fight. Chapter 1551. Qi Xiaomei and the others finally caught up to the hive, but this was also the beginning of a large number of casualties. When humans saw hope, this race would never lack courage. Lu Xiaoyi's Gatling gun was extremely effective at opening up a passage, but if he was asked to complete an area of defense and attack the hive, it would be beyond his ability. After all, he could only use 50% to 60% of his strength, which was much stronger than the other people in the fruit platter who could only use less than 40%. However, there was still a limit. Most of the strongest reptiles were gathered around the hive, and these 20,000 people were far from being elites. The most they could do was to stall the hive, but they could not destroy it. The focus of the battle shifted from Whitestone Mountain to the hive. The key was whether Qi Xiaomei and the other 20,000 people could hold on until the main human army arrived. In other words, how much pressure could Lu Xiaoyi take off for them? Around the hive, the frenzied reptiles were desperately defending it. Qi Xiaomei and the other 20,000 people could only stall the hive and ensure that they were not destroyed. As for attacking the hive, they did not have the ability to do so at the moment. 20,000 people were already a lot, but considering the fact that most of them were in the foundation establishment stage, and there were only a few intermediate and advanced physical cultivators, it was difficult for such a small number to do anything on a battlefield with millions of people. Lu Xiaoyi's difficulty was that he could not only attack in front of him. During a sudden attack, he could maximize his attack power in a certain direction, but now that they were in the vast barren plateau, he had to protect the 20,000 people in a circle. There was no way for it to fan out, and it could only sweep in circles, just like the old radars in his previous life. Perhaps some of the stronger insects could not be swept away, but due to the speed of the radars, there would be countless insects that would rush forward to fill up the gaps. This meant that the 20,000 players had to hold on by themselves. The casualties increased rapidly. In less than 2 hours, the 20,000 people had become 10,000 people. The 70,000 ordinary soldiers who had been abandoned did not suffer as many casualties. To them, being abandoned was not a bad thing. The situation was very clear, and the goal was very clear. At this point, there was no other way except to fill the hive with human and insect heads. Lu Xiaoyi had also considered whether he should give up on protecting these people and focus on attacking the hive. However, after a few attempts with the flying swords, he immediately gave up. There was something strange about the hive. It would only be effective if the nutman destroyed it himself. The development of the situation was not optimistic. He estimated that these people would be annihilated before the arrival of the main force, even if they were protected by his flying sword. As the saying goes, the fire will burn brighter when the crowd gathers firewood. Just as Lu Xiaoyi was about to run out of tricks, another heavenly deity, a cultivator with a large fruit platter, stepped forward. He was the heavenly deity invited by the two supervising teams. After floating with great difficulty, he finally approached the insectoid nest battlefield. In terms of offense, the sword vein orthodoxies were no weaker than others. However, in terms of defense, the law vein orthodoxies were no match for anyone else. Although his abilities were greatly reduced, this cultivator from the strawberry realm still cleverly displayed the diversity of his spells. He used a large swamp in one direction and then a quicksand trap in another direction. Then, he began to use his wood-type vines. In terms of lethality, these methods could not be compared to the flying swords. However, in terms of delaying the attacks of the insects, they were several times better than the flying swords. In this special environment and background, they were extremely useful. At the very least, the insectoid nest was now difficult to move. This was a battle of wills. If the insects could fight without fear of death, so could the humans. The 20,000 supervising teams did not expect such a dramatic change in their roles on the battlefield. They went from being a side division to being the core of the human race's fate. 4 hours later, the main force of reinforcements arrived. Only 2,000 people were left out of the 20,000. However, they had completed their mission. Hundreds of thousands of humans swarmed forward. Almost all of the human cultivators were gathered here. They did not understand the insectoid nest, but they could at least destroy it with brute force. The battle was still intense, but it was nearing its end. To Lu Xiaoyi, who had been paying attention to the insectoid nest, the result was beyond his expectations. After the insectoid nest was destroyed, there was no so-called queen insectoid inside. There was nothing inside, it was empty. However, he could feel a familiar oddness. It was the trace of a spatial passage after it collapsed. In other words, this insectoid nest was actually a moving spatial passage disguised as an insectoid nest. The fluctuations of spatial passages had their own characteristics. It was related to the origin, distance, and method of construction. The reason why he felt it was familiar was because he had a similar feeling at the exit of the zombie passage in the King Zombie realm. The universe was in chaos. Someone, or some force, was fishing in troubled waters. This spatial passage should be the culprit behind the destruction of the insects. It usually hid underground to accumulate power. When the earth moved, it would either actively or passively come out to wreak havoc. There were still many questions that were unclear. For example, were these insects defective products like the zombies in the King Zombie realm? Voidzer could fly, but they could not. Were they defective products? Or was it just because of the special environment of the Nut realm? Were they forced to appear when the earth moved? Were they forced to the surface because the insects could not withstand the earth's movements? Or was there a plan? Why did the insectoid nest, which existed as a spatial passage, come to the surface this time? Was it passive? Or was it the planned time to act? Who was commanding them? Was it a big insect with intelligence? Or was it some other creature? Where was it or he hiding? Had it already escaped through the spatial passage? Or had it mixed in with the sea of insects and sneaked underground? If he could not enter the Nut realm, he would not know anything. However, he did not care. If he had suspicions, he would have a direction. If he really went in, he might not be able to find the truth, even with his skills. After the insectoid nest was destroyed, the insects might have also felt the danger. They instinctively knew that their escape route was cut off. Without support, some began to burrow underground, gradually forming a trend. The large insectoid swarm seemed invincible, but after losing their backbone, they no longer had the madness of the past. They also knew that this was the human world. At the very least, this was the case on the surface. For the Nut realm, in the next few hundred years, or even longer, eliminating insects would become the most important task for humans. Going underground was a long way to go. This was their responsibility, but at least they did not have the once every 300 years of problem hanging over their heads. This was the meaning of battle. There was no true sense of isolation from the world, nor was there a paradise. Even in the Nut realm that was completely sealed off, there were still invasions from other races. What made Lu Xiaoyi vigilant was that this spatial teleportation ability was very terrifying, and he still could not crack it. If one day someone used this teleportation ability in a place that was important to him, what would he do? This was the reason why he began to delve into the path of space. Cultivation always forced you to improve. Chapter 1552. The Heavenly Deities. Yes, the cultivators of the fruit platter were very happy, because they had solved a 1,000-year-old problem for their brother realm. This was significant. If they hadn't succeeded this time, it could be foreseen that one of the 36 heavenly deities of the fruit platter would have been a Zerg. Even if they were very tolerant of other races, they definitely couldn't tolerate a bug crawling in the fruit platter. How could they eat it? Thus, a victory assembly was held in the air. Hundreds of true monarchs gathered together, each taking out their treasures and relaxing their hearts. Lu Xiaoyi was the main point. The people of the fruit platter now treated this outsider as one of their own. This was a friendship that had been forged through pretending to be gods and ghosts, through blood and sweat. Great God Gatling will become an eternal legend of the nut world. Everyone raised their cups to him. Lu Xiaoyi laughed loudly. The 35 swindlers are all legends. I'll leave after having my fun. You guys still have work to do in the future. What kind of cultivator determined what kind of assembly there was? After a round of discussion, everyone couldn't help but change the topic to the mysterious bug nest and the mysterious space transportation channel. There were also many who understood the Tao of space, and Lu Xiaoyi benefited greatly from their discussion. A true monarch opened up a new path. You all said that the space channel is not bad, but I feel like we're missing a very important direction. Where does the energy to maintain the space channel come from? We all know how difficult it is to travel through space. For cultivators like us, entering and exiting the space we built ourselves is incomparably difficult. We need time and magic power to support it. It can't last for long. Bringing people along is doubly difficult. Humans are like this, let alone a world. Then, the nut world's energy that can completely isolate a world and remain unchanged for at least 10,000 years. How terrifying must it be? This kind of energy expenditure can't possibly come from a nut itself. It can't be supplied by humans either. Even immortals can't do it, so it can only come from the heavens, and it has to be a stable and continuous heavenly phenomenon. Everyone agreed with this, and a cultivator added, "That's right. Rather than studying the unfathomable and infinite space, it's more realistic to pursue the transmission of energy. There is a principle of decreasing energy transmission across universes. The further the distance, the more unstable it was. I could see that the nut world spatial barrier was rather stable, and it didn't seem to have changed much since the fruit plate's historical records. In that case, could it be said that the source of this energy came from some astronomical phenomenon in several universes, especially the most stable choice among the 3 universes?" What they said involved a very principled definition of the void of the universe, which was the problem of how the various universes were divided. Ever since Lu Xiaoyi walked through the void, defining his own position, direction, and so on, it often involved the problems of the various universes. In that case, how is each universe divided? What are the conditions for the difference? What was the basis for determining the boundary between this universe and that universe? The universe was not a beehive, and all the blocks were hexagons. There were no immortals or other ancient gods who came to mark the land. Some were big, some were small, and there was no pattern to them. In the cultivation world, since when? Was it the immemorial era or the ancient era? There was only one way to differentiate the universes, and that was according to the principle of decreasing energy form. The transmission of energy in the universe would decrease due to distance, environment, and so on. However, this decrease was a smooth curve, which was also in line with the knowledge that Lu Xiaoyi had learned in his previous life. However, in the real universe, there was a kind of sudden decrease. It was like a person swimming in the sea and suddenly feeling a chill in his stomach. The temperature was completely different from the surroundings. Apart from the accidental reason of a shark passing by, it basically meant one thing. You might be passing through a dark trench at the bottom of the sea. It was the same in the universe. It was just that humans couldn't feel it, but the form of energy could be clearly expressed. For example, if a shock wave was transmitted in the universe according to the normal principle of decreasing energy, as space and time increased, the energy would decrease. However, when it crossed a completely unmarked boundary, there would suddenly be a sudden decrease in energy. In the cultivation world, this line, or this boundary, was called the boundary between different universes. Simply speaking, when the shock wave suddenly decreased in a cliff-breaking manner, it meant that it had come to another universe. It was conceivable that if an illusory energy body wanted to shoot from one universe to dozens of universes, how many times would it have to go through the energy reduction? If it was not abundant enough, it would disappear in the dark environment of the universe and become nothingness in the background of the void. This was the way cultivators divided the universes. For example, it would take dozens of years to cross the big fruit plate. It was the first time that Lu Xiaoyi had seen such a big universe. In the area of Zhou, it was enough to divide dozens of universes. The reason why the big fruit plate was called a universe was that if you shot out an energy body here, it might fly for dozens of years before it encountered a cliff-breaking, abrupt decrease. As the perfected cultivator had said, if there was energy coming from the outside world that could maintain such a strong and stable power for such a long time, then the source of the energy would not be too far away from the big fruit plate. It would be within the 2 or 3 universes. The reason why they did not say that it was provided by the celestial phenomenon in the big fruit plates universe was because they understood their own universe very well and knew that such a celestial phenomenon did not exist. The cultivators of the big fruit plate could not be blamed for being conservative and not being able to go out. It was because their universe was too big, so big that they might not be able to fully understand their own universe in their entire lifetime. Everyone present was a perfected cultivator, and some of them had walked out of the big fruit plate before. Therefore, they began to discuss the possibility of the celestial phenomenon in the outside universe affecting the nut world. However, this kind of discussion was meaningless because there were too many universes outside. Just like a basketball ball, how many ping-pong balls could its surface touch? Therefore, there were countless debates. In Lu Xiaoyi's ears, he had a thorough understanding of the special astronomical phenomena in the universe near the big fruit plate. However, it was not of much practical significance because he could not visit them one by one. The universe was so big that it was beyond the reach of man. It was not the same concept. Huang Daxian asked him, "Junior brother Yin, what do you think?" Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. "It's ethereal and traceless, impossible to find. As for me, since I'm going to leave this place, I might as well take the nearest route and directly fly out of the big fruit plate from here." This was also a method. For the form of energy, the abrupt decrease was scary, but the accumulation of decay over a long period of time could not be underestimated. This could be considered the simplest possible direction. Chapter 1553. Starting from the nut world, if he wanted to return to the correct course, Lu Xiaoyi should fly inside the fruit platter instead of flying out of the fruit platter through the shortest distance. The reason why he did this was not because he wanted to solve the secret of the reptile space tunnel in the nut world, but because of a more famous astronomical phenomenon in the nearby universe, the Ferris wheel. There were too many secrets in this universe. As an individual, it was impossible to understand them all. The secrets were endless. If you understood one, 3 more would pop up. That was why he never deliberately pursued them. The reason why he came to the upper realm of Zhou Xian and Jindan was because he was young and naive. He always wanted to understand everything. In the end, it took him nearly 1,000 years to get from Jindan to perfected Lord. It wasn't that he shouldn't be curious, but cultivators had different pursuits in different periods of time. Now, he was no longer the person who would pursue a secret relentlessly. In his heart, there were now countless secrets, but none of them had an answer. When there were too many lice, there was no need to bite. When there were too many debts, there was no need to worry. His attitude towards these secrets now was to let them be. If he was lucky, there would be a day when they would be solved. Even if he never knew the answer, he could still write a book for himself and leave it in the dome. He even thought of the name, 100,000 Whys. In fact, many secrets were no longer secrets once your realm reached a certain level. It was like when you were a child looking at the world, full of curiosity and questions. When you lived a bumpy life and sat alone in front of the window, those strange things that used to be strange will be nothing more than ordinary trifles in your life. His purpose for going to the Ferris wheel was very clear. It was to have more contact with the path of space. Only with a deep enough understanding of space could he run and chase. He would not be caught off guard when others used their space techniques. His current opponents seemed to be getting more and more advanced. The Ferris wheel was such a place with abundant space. The cultivators in the fruit platter did not think that it was the energy source behind the nut world only because it was too famous in the nearby universe. It was so famous that every cultivator passing by would not give up the chance to experience it. Such a famous place was not suitable for conspiracies and tricks, so it was automatically excluded. It would delay the journey, but fortunately, the difference would not be too big. It was within an acceptable range. This was a relatively peaceful journey. They didn't meet any bad people, nor did they make any friends. In general, as they got further and further away from the Hengi realm, it seemed that the cultivators' tempers were much more normal. More than 10 years later, the celestial phenomenon was getting closer and closer. The flow of cultivators also began to increase. It was just like the amusement parks of his previous life. Adults would bring their children to flock here during holidays to enjoy a rare moment of happiness. The Ferris wheel was a large amusement park in the nearby dozens of universes. The adults were true monarchs, and the children were yuaniing. There was only one amusement facility, the Ferris wheel. It was, after all, a celestial phenomenon, visible from a great distance. It was a miniature celestial phenomenon, with a planet on its axis and 19 moons in close orbit. 19 moons like 19 cabins, connected not by visible supports, but by invisible forces of attraction between the stars. The planet was like a rotating body with its own motor, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. At the same time, it constantly swung the 19 moons, but it was always able to control it within a reasonable range, to the extent that the moons would not really be swung out and never return. This was a kind of completely irregular swinging. It was precisely because of this irregularity that the rotation speed of the planet was irregular, and the distance between the moons was also irregular. Therefore, in the system formed by the entire planet and the moons, it was very easy to have irregular changes in acceleration. When the number of moons on one side of the planet was 10, the speed of the moons would slow down. At the same time, the 9 moons on the other side of the planet would suddenly accelerate, until the speed was so fast that it could throw out a space dimension. The mechanism behind this was very complicated. Why were there 19 moons? Why would the 9 moons on the weaker side suddenly accelerate when the 2 sides were not balanced? Acceleration could create a space dimension. What was the purpose of the planet in this? Were there other factors involved in the appearance of the space dimension? A head full of questions, a head full of question marks. It was not only Lu Xiaoyi who was like this, but every cultivator who had just arrived was also like this. They were all amazed by this not huge, not grand, and not explosive celestial phenomenon. Large celestial phenomena had their great grandeur, and small celestial phenomena had their small ingenuity. They were all the masterpieces of the Creator. There were many ways to create a space dimension. For example, time could create space. Speed could create space. Magic power could create space. Spiritual power could open space. Mysterious power could break space. Magic array could create space. Tools could create space, and so on. This was where the joy of cultivation lay. For example, what Lu Xiaoyi had learned in Xianyuan and carefree travel was basically to use mysterious power to break space. What the Wings of Cloud had taught him was to use a combination of spiritual power and magic power to break space. Now that he saw this Ferris wheel's celestial phenomenon, it was a method to break space by relying on speed. It was not absolute speed, but acceleration, relying on the sudden increase and decrease in speed to achieve the ability to enter and exit the space dimension. It was very mystical. When he heard the cultivator with the large fruit platter talk about this in the nut world, he was moved to investigate it. Now that he saw it, it was indeed very mystical. Cultivators came from all over the place. The atmosphere was joyous and harmonious, and they were very friendly to each other. Everyone came here with the intention of appreciating, not to fight. The Tao of space was very important to Lu Xiaoyi, and it was also very important to any cultivator. But to understand the secrets of speed and space, it was not something that could be casually done because there was a fee, charging for viewing the celestial phenomenon. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi had seen such a strange behavior in the thousands of years he had spent in the void. This was basically impossible for a medium to large celestial phenomenon, because if it was too big, you would not be able to prevent others from entering. But in the Ferris wheel, because it was a small celestial phenomenon, the planet was just a small planet with a diameter of 100 miles. Of course, the satellites were even smaller, varying from 100 feet in size. The distance between the planet and the satellites was only a few thousand miles. Such distance in the void was like having no distance at all. It was very easy to control. The fee was charged from the cultivation realm closest to the Ferris wheel, called Lu Gudao sect. It was also the only human cultivation realm in this part of the universe. As the saying goes, those who rely on the mountain eat the mountain. Those who rely on the water eat the water. Since it was close to the celestial phenomenon, of course, it was necessary to eat the celestial phenomenon. There was nothing strange about it. The fee was not cheap, 100 purple spirits per person. As long as you paid enough purple spirits, you could board a satellite and wait for yourself to be thrown into the space dimension while it was rotating. It was a very interesting way to play. Chapter 1554. P.S. Don't ask for tickets at the beginning of the month. Cry out at the end of the month. Guaranteed monthly tickets will not be voted during the double period. The expired tickets will be halved. The Xinxia section is full of gods. It's not easy to survive. Everyone, please help. Every 1,000 votes will be added. Thank you. Also, friends who read pirated versions, please help out. Without you, I wouldn't be able to enter the top 10 of Xinxia. It's really awkward. Lu Xiaoyi observed under the Ferris wheel for several days and found that things weren't as simple as he thought. It wasn't a matter of qualifications or some man-made obstacles. The key was that the Ferris wheel had to throw out the speed dimension, but sometimes it didn't. Or to put it more bluntly, it didn't work most of the time, only occasionally. But in the words of the cultivator who sold the tickets, if you bought a ticket and sat on it, you would be thrown out once after half a year. According to him, in the history of ticket sales in the Music Valley, the unluckiest one was only a year and a half, and only then did he achieve his wish to see the speed dimension. What was a year and a half to a cultivator? What he said made sense. Why didn't you pay the price? With a year and a half long to see such a rare speed dimension? Besides, this was just an example. For most cultivators who came to see it, they only needed to wait for a few months. Some were even lucky and were thrown out in the next moment. It was precisely because of this uncertainty that every satellite was arranged to be very full. Just like a real Ferris wheel, every cabin would not turn until it was full. Of course, it was different here. The staff of the Music Valley didn't decide whether to turn or not. They were only in charge of selling tickets and arranging the order of going up. When one or a few people were thrown into the speed dimension, they would arrange for these people to sit on it in order. The wheel was always turning, never stopping. At the very least, there wouldn't be a situation where the power was cut off or a mechanical failure occurred after turning. The self-adjusting ability of the weather was much more reliable than that of manpower. There was no need to consider the problems of maintenance and replacement of parts, nor the quality of the staff. Because the participants might not be thrown into the speed dimension immediately after going up, most of the time, they would just be spinning around, so there would always be people waiting for an empty seat below. It couldn't be said that it was overcrowded, but it was also impossible to get an empty seat immediately. There weren't many cultivators from the Paradise Valley realm here, but there were many cultivators from the surrounding universes. As the Yu-Hong checkpoint of these universes, as long as a cultivator reached the nascent soul realm, they would come here to try it whenever they had the chance. Perhaps they would be able to comprehend something from the dimensional space of this speed. 9 people could go up to each satellite. If there were more, the satellite might be able to throw them out of the dimensional space, but not everyone could enter the space. There was a problem of space capacity, so in order to ensure that everyone who handed in Ziqing could be thrown in, 9 people was a relatively safe number according to tens of thousands of years of experience. It wasn't up to you to decide who you wanted to go with, but it was up to you to decide who you wanted to go with. Of course, the Yuanying realm cultivators were considerate enough to prepare the honorable satellite. If you could hand in enough spiritual vigor, you would be able to get a seat immediately. Lu Xiaoyi didn't enjoy the honorable satellite treatment, not because he couldn't afford the spiritual vigor, but because there was no need to. Waiting was also a kind of cultivation, and he could see more interesting things. Battles could be rushed, but life couldn't be rushed. After so many years, because there was no problem with his cultivation, he didn't need to consume large amounts of spiritual vigor anymore. Now, his problem was to accumulate Tao Realm, so he collected more and more Ziqing along the way. He only saved and didn't use it, and his wealth started to grow. Spend what should be spent, and don't spend what shouldn't be spent. This was his financial philosophy. He bought the Yuanying hi-hat. He had to buy it because it was the ticket. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and it was inlaid with gold and jade. The price was 109 strands of Ziqing, and the extra strand was the cost of the hat. The remaining 8 strands were insurance. Although the hat was beautiful, the gold and jade were still mortal items. In terms of value, it couldn't be compared. 1 strand of Ziqing could be exchanged for 10,000 or even 100,000 hats. But here, you really couldn't do anything. These little tricks were everywhere. Even if you were caught, you would be spent, so you didn't really care about the small things. Fortunately, it was just a hat. If you're given a few more strands, a pair of shoes, a robe, and said to wear the special clothes of the space, would you take it or not? But the insurance asked for 8 strands of Ziqing. This was a question he had to ask clearly. Wasn't this a blatant robbery in a famous scenic spot? What is the insurance for? Is there compensation for losing an arm or a leg? Is there a sizable income for losing a family member? Or is there a lottery? The Yuanying hi-hat cultivator rolled his eyes. Oh, quite a lot. You have to be responsible for your own personal problems. We can't guarantee anything. Coming out to cultivate and walking in the void, you have to rely on your own ability. Who will compensate you for all kinds of adventures and mysteries? Will you give me the opportunities you get? The meaning of these 8 strands of Ziqing is that if you don't enter the space of speed, then you still have the qualifications to sit on the satellite and not come down until you are thrown into the space. Is it worth it? Absolutely worth it. You even managed to catch this one in a million chance. This means that you are unlucky. You only need to spend a few strands of Ziqing to start again. What are you still dissatisfied with? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. He put the hat on his head and could only accept it. His ranking was 14. In other words, if there was an empty space in front of him, he still had to wait 14 times. There were 126 people in front of him. After buying the ticket, it wasn't good to walk too far, because no one knew how many of the 19 satellites would be empty. Maybe it would be very slow, maybe very fast. If you walked far away, no one would wait for you. Looking around, there was a beautifully decorated mid-sized floating raft floating there. A banner was very conspicuous. My views on the great Tao of space over the years. Lu Xiaoyi understood. The gimmick of this banner was the insights and experiences of those who had some achievements in the great Tao of space over the years, who would expose their real insights for everyone to see. Needless to say, there was a fee to enter. Whoever went was an idiot. Around him, there were 100 or 200 cultivators loitering outside. They were all waiting for an empty space. He couldn't be bothered to see who he was with. Most of the people here came in groups. There were very few like him who ran around alone. He had no interest in joining in the fun. Sitting cross-legged alone, he meditated on his gains over the years. He felt that on the basis of theory, he had gained a lot in the 60 years in the big fruit platter. Before he left, the cultivators who pretended to be mysterious with him knew that he liked to study the 5 ties. They even gave him many good things in this area. He knew very well. Companions were very important to a person of the same mind. He had always been lacking in this area. This was the result of leaving the sect for a long time. He didn't have many elders who truly understood him, but in the big fruit platter, he made up for his lack in this area. It was also fate. Chapter 1555. Lu Xiaoyi had already grasped quite a bit of the Taoist space. In recent years, he had also had some lucky chances in this area. His understanding of space had long gone from a rudimentary understanding to an increasingly profound level. He could already reach a level of practical application in both offense and defense. He had even killed a sun god. However, the main cause of Saberhin's death was still the wings of cloud. These little spirits were not easy to deal with. Not only did they kill a sun god, they also almost accidentally killed him. In fact, they were already dead. What a pity for Bai Hua. This was a lesson. Although he didn't easily think about this helplessness in the past few decades, there was always a thorn in his heart that he had to pull out. He didn't know why, but he seemed to loathe his previous indiscriminate hooligan habits. 60 years of fruit platter, there were countless opportunities in both the inner and outer realms, but he didn't seem to be interested in them. Bai Hua, could it be that she had infected him with her stone-cold nature? He was a person who held grudges. He was narrow-minded. He had never changed. He was very clear that the best medicine to treat his change was to pull out this thorn. Who knew how long that would take? In the blink of an eye, a few months had passed. 3 cultivators on the satellites were thrown into the space of speed. He watched from aside. If he didn't personally experience it, it would be very difficult for him to figure out what was going on. It looked pretty good, and the speed wasn't slow. A Taoist inadvertently came to his side and bowed. This humble Taoist is Lian Heng. I see that senior has been looking left and right. It seems like your heart belongs to someone. You must be anxious to step onto the satellite to experience the wonders of space. This humble Taoist is ranked in the top 3, so I'm not in a hurry to go up. If senior is willing to give me 10 strands of purple light, I'm willing to exchange places with fellow Taoists. We can all become friends. It's a happy thing. Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything. He only looked at him meaningfully. This person who called himself Lian Heng was a bit embarrassed. Or 8 strands will do as well. Senior, you have to let me earn a bit. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Tell me the truth, and we can still discuss it. If you don't, then please do as you wish. Lian Heng stared blankly for a moment before he sighed. To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist, I eat the rotor of the Ferris wheel. I rely on queuing up to earn spiritual opportunity. Because I've been waiting here all year round, I always have a few tickets that are closer to the front. Some cultivators can't stand waiting for a long time, and they're rich and overbearing. So, people like me will exchange the tickets that are closer to the front with the other party. I'll make some money, and you won't have to wait too long. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What he did in his previous life was perfectly replicated here. There were loopholes everywhere, so it was hard to say whether it was the right thing to do. For a top-notch expert like him, it was a waste of time and life. However, for those with average aptitudes, it was also a way to obtain spiritium, especially for Yuanying, who went to the deep space alone to collect spiritium. There was no guarantee that she would be able to obtain spiritium. There was also danger involved. How could it be more stable and easy than making spiritium here? Lu Xiaoyi was a little tempted. A few months was still time, but he didn't immediately agree. Instead, he looked at the other party with interest. Lian Heng saw that this Taoist had sharp eyes, so he could only tell him everything. I'm a disciple of Lugu. This is also tacitly approved by Lugu. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. He had guessed that this was the case, but wouldn't have made arrangements with Lu Valley in advance for this kind of business. Otherwise, what would happen if you couldn't sell the tickets that you bought with 100 zeeching? If it fell into his hands, he might have worked for nothing for a year. In the cultivation world, who didn't have a few tricks up their sleeves? How could there not be such dark things? It was impossible to get rid of them. To him, a few strands of zeeching in exchange for a few months' time was worth it. Why would he think of anything else? So, 6 strands of zeeching. If you're willing, we'll exchange. If not, you can find someone else. Lien Hung smiled bitterly. Senior, you really know how to bargain. Fine, 6 strands of zeeching it is. Who told me to have an affinity with you? Lien Hung exchanged for the tall hat and left. He felt relieved. He was telling the truth, but also not. In fact, the profession of will operator was also very restricted here. The higher-ups of Lugu had long set a rule. Every Lugu cultivator could only do this once, and the duration couldn't exceed 3 years. They were afraid that the cultivators below them would become lazy after a long time. He had been here for almost 3 years. The zeeching had earned some money, so this was his last chance to leave the tickets to himself. Lugu cultivators also needed to comprehend the great Tao of space. However, just as he was about to exercise his rights, the elder of Lugu on duty secretly told him that he found 2 famous monarchs in a nearby universe among the 8 people in his group. This elder of Lugu was very old, so he found a leisurely job at the Ferris wheel. When he was young, he had wandered around the universe and knew many people. That was why he could see the background of the 2 monarchs at a glance. Lugu only sold tickets. First, it didn't care about fighting, and second, it didn't care about life or death. Therefore, in history, there were conflicts on satellites, and there were even cases of murder in dimensional space. This monarch had some relationship with Lien Hung. For safety's sake, he told him to change his group of companions. It was human nature to seek good luck and avoid evil, especially when he was a little Yuanying mixed with 2 monarchs with a very bad reputation. The slightest mistake could cost him his life. Therefore, he continued to change his group. Otherwise, this would be Lien Heng's last time. He was about to reach the end of his 3-year term, so he should leave after experiencing the great Tao of space. In fact, there were not many choices. It was inevitable that they would look for Lu Xiaoyi. It was not that they really wanted to harm anyone. They were all perfected sovereigns, so they had the confidence to do so. The human heart was complicated. Even someone as astute as Lu Xiaoyi couldn't completely see through it. However, for Lu Xiaoyi, as long as he wasn't with the sun god, he didn't need to be afraid of anything. In less than a month, the cultivators on 3 more satellites were thrown into dimensional space due to the acceleration. They would stay in the dimensional space for a month to a few months before they came out on their own. The place they came out of was still the same, so they didn't have to worry about being sent to some inexplicable place and not being able to find their way home. Lu Xiaoyi's group was the last to board the satellite. He didn't know if these 19 satellites had their own names, but it didn't matter. He would go wherever the Lugu cultivator pointed. It was just a space trip. He wasn't worried about danger. Back then, with the help of the wings of cloud, he had been to the 36th-dimensional space. He was probably the only one among the cultivators here. What else couldn't he handle? 9 people boarded the satellite in order. There were 7 monarchs and 2 Yuanying, which was completely different from the composition of the other satellites. Under normal circumstances, most of the people who came here to experience the great Tao of space were Yuanying. He didn't know what had happened, but it happened to be reversed here. Lu Xiaoyi didn't bat an eyelid. Whoever it was, they'd better not provoke him. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind leaving them in the dimensional space forever. Chapter 1556. The satellite they were on was only 1,000 feet in radius. It was barren, and there was not even a single rock on it. This was because everything that was not solid had been thrown away over the past tens of thousands of years. Among the 8 people, there were 2 small groups. One group was made up of 2 supremes, and 2 Yuanying. The other group was made up of a pair of master and disciple. The remaining 3, including Lu Xiaoyi, were all single. 1,000 feet in radius was very small for cultivators. It was so small that it was difficult for them to have any privacy. Everyone stayed in their own places and began to enjoy the ride of the Ferris wheel. Huijin looked down and tried her best to get rid of all distracting thoughts in order to maintain the best state of cultivation. Beside her, senior brother Yin Li was also trying his best to restrain himself. He did not dare to be too curious about the people and things around him. It could not be helped. Both of them were Yuanying cultivators. They were the only 2 weaklings on this satellite. The special environment, which was not a big deal for Supremes, was a big deal for them. The rotation of the planet was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. It did not seem to have any pattern. When it was fast, it was like a spinning top. When it was slow, it was as if it was still. Even the natives of this universe, the cultivators of Lu Gu's sect, could not grasp the pattern. They had not studied it thoroughly for tens of thousands of years. The biggest result of this rotation was that the 19 satellites, which were pulled by the gravitational force of the planet, were also sometimes fast and sometimes slow. If one were to add in the fact that they were thousands of miles apart from each other, there was no fixed swing arm to connect them. They only relied on the mutual attraction and repulsion of objects to form a bond. The influence of the satellites on each other, and so on, there was only one result. The sudden fast and slow speed was 10 times faster than the rotation of the planet. The speed-dimensional space was created by chance under such circumstances. However, if one were to be a passenger on the Ferris wheel, it would be hard to say how comfortable this experience was. This kind of speed change was very common on satellites, and it happened all the time. However, only when the speed change reached a certain level and conformed to a certain magical law could it produce a speed-dimensional space. There were coincidences and inevitability in this. For cultivators who couldn't reach the pinnacle of mathematics, this could only be a coincidence. However, for mortals who had developed the human brain to a very high degree, solving this kind of equation didn't seem too difficult. This was the essence of the world. Taoists, including this world of cultivation, were used to using a little, an appropriate amount, and a few percent as measurement units. If you asked them to solve such a difficult problem, it would be a bit too much for them. Everyone preferred to turn the real into the virtual and the virtual into the nothingness. Creating something out of nothing and using mystery as a topic, they gradually lost their rigorous scientific spirit. Of course, Huijin didn't know that there was a pattern to every change. The key was whether you could build such a comprehensive and complex mathematical model. Since countless predecessors couldn't do it after tens of thousands of years, there must be no pattern. All they could do was passively endure, adapt, and get used to it. For cultivators in this kind of speed change, it was possible for them to be thrown out in an instant or be pressed tightly against the satellite, as if they were carrying a mountain. Only cultivators had abnormally strong bodies. If ordinary people experienced this kind of speed change, their internal organs would be torn to pieces. Using the concept from Lu Xiaoyi's previous life, there was a limit to how much they could bear. If it exceeded 7 or 8 G, they would be finished. Cultivators with a higher level of cultivation naturally had a stronger endurance. Yuanying cultivators like the 2 of them had to first maintain their physical condition at all times and use their magical power to adjust their bodily functions. When a speed change changed, they would use their magical power to offset the instantaneous thrust of the satellite. When a speed change changed, they would also use their magical power to maintain a firm grip on the satellite so that they wouldn't float out. This kind of joke wasn't rare on the Ferris wheel. It happened from time to time, and it mostly happened to Yuanying. In the eyes of the onlookers below, it was a cultivator who mysteriously floated out. It wasn't that they didn't want to ride the Ferris wheel, but that they couldn't control their bodies. Under normal circumstances, after experiencing this a few times, even Yuanying cultivators would be able to more or less control their bodies, and they would slowly adapt. Cultivators couldn't build an accurate model in theory, but they had an incomparable advantage in terms of physical adaptability. Often, they would know how to deal with it, but they didn't understand the real reason behind it. This was normal. Hua Jin was experiencing this process. She was very outstanding and didn't embarrass herself. Senior brother, Yin, Li was the same as her. As a most outstanding disciple in the sect for thousands of years, this was a basic ability. After a few days, their bodies had completely adapted to the changes in acceleration and deceleration, and they were able to cope with it with ease. Only then did the two of them truly relax. They began to have the mood to observe the surroundings and communicate with the two seniors. The four of them came from Strange Mountain, an upper-class cultivation world outside of several universes. They were rich in spiritual vigor and had a long history. They were a local tyrant with considerable strength. They couldn't participate in the battle of the universe only because they didn't have enough bodies. Quality and brightness were the two aspects of true strength, and neither could be missing. The orthodoxy of Strange Mountain held the Ferris wheel in high esteem because their orthodoxy was deeply related to the Tao of space. Therefore, almost every cultivator who had achieved yuanying and had the ability to travel in the void by themselves would come here to see if they could get some different enlightenment from the Ferris wheel. It was a tradition. Some came alone, and some came with their seniors. It all depended on the situation. She and senior brother Yinli had the ability to travel across multiple universes, and they wanted to do so as well. However, they were accompanied by two true monarchs from the bizarre mountain this time. It was a coincidence, and it was also to protect the two of them. The two seniors were Supremes, and Supreme's holding stone was a primordial spirit cultivator. He was no stranger to the Ferris wheel, and had been here more than once. It was not uncommon for cultivators who specialized in the Tao of space in the nearby universes. Enlightenment was not usually completed in one visit, so it was normal for Supremes to come here several times. They didn't care about the consumption of 100 strands of purple light. However, Holding Stone came here for another important purpose. He had obtained a space treasure when he was traveling in outer space. After hundreds of years of research, he found that it had a lot to do with the Tao of space. Therefore, he came here with the treasure to prove his theory. It just so happened that the two juniors had the opportunity to experience the Ferris wheel, so he brought them along to benefit from it. He didn't want the goodies to flow into the fields of others. There were 9 people on one satellite, and they occupied 4 of them. Considering that the others didn't know each other, it was difficult for them to form a group. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about their safety. Strange Mountain was never an orthodoxy that was easy to bully. Chapter 1557. This kind of speed change is really uncomfortable. It's completely different from flying. If we really spend a year and a half on it, it'll be terrible. Yinli complained. No one paid attention to him because they all knew that he was a person who liked to complain. He didn't really want to do anything. Seeing that the two juniors finally got used to it, Baosher opened his mouth. There are some things that he needed to explain in advance so that they would know what to do and what not to do after entering the speed dimension. This treasure of mine is called the Void Crown. It's very simple. When opening up space, it will cause space to deflect, which is beneficial to the formation of the dimensional space. After a while, all of you will gather around me. When the satellite's speed changes violently, I will use this treasure to determine how much influence it has on the formation of the speed dimension. You also know that because of the existence of the Ferris wheel, there are many orthodoxies in the surrounding dozens of universes that dabble in the Tao of space. But why is my strange mountain unique among them? It's because of our perseverance in the study of space. After tens of thousands of years under the relay of the seniors and teachers, we finally have a new discovery about the Ferris wheel's ability to open up the speed dimension. The two juniors listened attentively, not daring to miss a single word. They were the two people with the most potential in the yuanying generation. That was why they had the opportunity to come here and listen to the latest discovery about the Tao of space. Under normal circumstances, this kind of discovery would be kept a secret. There were requirements for one's level and loyalty. It was the biggest secret in the cultivation sects that they didn't even want to mention it in words. Bauscher spoke frankly in his divine sense. Our discovery is why countless cultivators have been studying the Tao of space for tens of thousands of years. But in the end, the results are so little that there's no practical application at all. In fact, everyone has neglected an extremely important aspect. We all know that the reason why the Ferris wheel can open up the dimensional space is because of its speed change. So the research on speed change has never stopped. But we also neglected a very important factor. Speed change isn't only a change in speed, but also a change in direction. The reason why everyone can't use speed change to enter the dimensional space is because we're always running in a straight line and there's no change in direction. And when the satellite revolves around the planet, it actually doesn't only change its speed, but also its direction. The two Yuanying disciples fell into deep thought. Martial Uncle was right. Because the satellite revolved around the planet, it had a tangential angle at all times. If it was a normal celestial body, this tangential angle would never change when it revolved around the main star. Because the distance between the satellite and the planet did not change, the satellite would always draw a circle with the same diameter. However, on the Ferris wheel, the distance between the 19 satellites and the planets could change at any time. There were many reasons for this change. There was the sudden increase and decrease in the attraction and repulsion forces of the planets, the irregular influence of the 19 moons, and even more so, the acceleration. Therefore, in the Ferris wheel, the acceleration actually refers to two aspects: the magnitude of the acceleration and the direction. Everyone had neglected the problem of direction. This was the latest research result of Strain Supreme, led by Martial Uncle Bauscher. No one knew where Boulder got his hands on this light halo. The biggest use of it was that it could control the direction of the light halo to a certain extent. From there, it could discover the connection between the space halo and the direction of the light halo. I don't need to explain the significance of the speed space. Everyone is working hard. Therefore, I ask you to keep this new discovery absolutely confidential. You must not leak it out, because it may change the way the cultivation world fights. Huijin and Yin Li nodded silently. Of course, they understood the special meaning of this ability. If one day, a cultivator could adjust his speed while flying, suddenly accelerate or decelerate, and then adjust his direction, he could enter and exit the dimensional space at any time while flying. What did that mean? It meant that the opponent would not be able to detect his whereabouts at all, because the opponent could be farting in another dimensional space. If any cultivator had this ability, he would be almost invincible. He could attack or retreat. He could freely travel between the main world and the dimensional space without wasting any time. If other cultivators wanted to keep up with his rhythm, even if they knew the normal great Tao of space, they would need to use their magical power, spirit, and other mysterious methods. It would be too late to open the dimensional door and travel through it. The more the orthodoxy relied on speed, the more it relied on it. It could, to a large extent, change the way the cultivators fought with each other. Of course, this method could also be done at the immortal stage, but that was another matter. There were countless cultivators in the cultivation world, but how many of them could become immortals? This discovery was very important because it had a very strong practical value. Of course, there was still a long way to go to achieve this step. How to achieve the point where the speed and direction were compatible required countless efforts. It was meaningless to succeed occasionally. The key was to confirm this method and achieve a 100% success rate. Only then could it be used in actual combat. This was the purpose of their visit. Bauscher's expression was serious. We can't control the direction of the satellite. In order to confirm our conjecture, we need to artificially change the speed and direction. If we can do it, we can go in and the others can't. This proves that our idea is correct. The separation halo will change direction between the four of us. No matter who goes in, it will be our success. The separation halo will record the change in speed and direction. After we pass through it many times, it will naturally form a set of data, which will lay a solid foundation for further research in the future. Everything is difficult at the beginning. We just need a successful start. The two Yuanying were very excited. It was their honor to be able to participate in such an activity. No cultivator would refuse such a temptation. Huijin was very careful. Martial uncle, if the few of us, or one of us, mysteriously enter the dimensional space, and the others can't, won't it attract the suspicion of the other 5? Or even the suspicion of the Lu Valley people below? If 9 of us from Strange Mountain came, it would be great if we could reserve an entire satellite. Baishi's expression was cold. The Lu Valley cultivators will not allow cultivators from the same orthodoxy to stay on the same satellite. In the past, there was a certain power that reserved an entire satellite and then did some strange research on it. In the end, it almost destroyed the entire satellite. For people was the maximum limit. Placing cultivators of different origins on each satellite is the principle of the Lu Valley people. Chapter 1558. The planet was spinning and the satellite was flying. The 4 cultivators from the Strange Mountain gathered together and formed a fan-shaped formation. This was for the sake of changing the direction of the light corona. There was a lot of knowledge involved in this. Every time the speed change reached a certain level, Baishi would use the light corona. This was a problem of trial and error. When the people disappeared and entered the dimensional space, and no one else reacted, it would be a success. The worst-case scenario was that the satellite sent the 9 people into the dimensional space before their experiment succeeded. In that case, they would have to choose to start all over again. Not only would they have to spend more purple purity, but if they repeated it too many times, it would also arouse the suspicion of others. Cultivation was full of variables. What they didn't know was that this was not the only variable. There were other people who were also talking, such as the master and disciple. They were both in the monarch realm. The master was in the primordial soul realm, and the disciple was in the Yin soul realm. They were a very powerful master and disciple duo. They came from a more distant galaxy and were famous in their respective universes. When they passed by this place and heard about such an interesting space phenomenon, of course they wouldn't let it go. After all, wasn't traveling for all kinds of opportunities and coincidences? Master, what are those 4 people doing? It seems very unusual. I can vaguely feel the power of space, but it doesn't work every time. Since they have the Ferris wheel, why do they still need to waste their energy to open a space passage? The one who asked was the disciple called He Qian. This name was a bit strange. In fact, he was a child that the master picked up by the river. He didn't expect him to become a powerful monarch. The old man drank 3 cups of wine and said with a scheming look, "There's no other reason. It's just to test the way of space. Maybe they have some new ideas and want to use it in this special environment to see what changes it can make. It's also a way to crack the secret of the Ferris wheel." Disciple, don't think that you can look down on other orthodoxies just because you're from a big world. In some specific directions, small worlds and orthodoxies have their own strengths. Those who can survive in the universe's cultivation world are not complete trash. He Qian smiled. His master was like this. He started saying these words when he entered the sect, from Qi refining to foundation establishment, and now to monarch. He didn't know what he would do if he didn't have these nagging words one day. However, he believed that attaching importance to something was one thing, while being confident was another. They should not be mixed together. Perhaps small realms and small orthodoxies had their own unique strengths, but the cultivation of cultivators was about balance, and the strength of a force depended on its foundation. A single strength was not enough to help you in all aspects. Master, it seems to be the power of some kind of artifact. They are quite bold, daring to take out such a spatial treasure so brazenly. Aren't you afraid that someone will be spying on you? 3 Cups scolded, "Quiet. Do you think everyone is like you, acting unscrupulously? No matter who you see, you want to take whatever good things they have for a look. There are 4 of them. What is there to be afraid of?" Kawakami laughed. For people, only 2 of them were slightly troublesome. Could those two little Yuanying be counted as one? But that woman looks pretty good. She has a celestial air about her. 3 Cups jokingly scolded. You brat. I'm warning you, don't mess around in this place. After all, we're guests from afar. These 4 people are obviously from the same orthodoxy, so their domain shouldn't be too far away. Not to mention, there's the Joy Valley Dao right ground below. We, the anchor chain people, clearly distinguish between right and wrong. We can rob openly, but we can't rob secretly. Don't create unnecessary trouble here. Kawakami was speechless. It's just a compliment. Master, this disciple has never embarrassed you in the past 1,000 years outside. You're saying it as if I'm evil beyond redemption. The master and disciple duo came from the famous anchor chain domain of the main world. It was as famous as Zhou Xian, 5 Rings, Lu Chun, Guangming, and Hung River domain. Of course, this didn't include the Heaven's Choice continent. That was the entirety of the entire negative space. The anchor chain people were bold and daring in their actions. They were still nearly 100 years away from here. Even so, the master and disciple duo still dared to travel together. It could be seen how confident they were in their own strength. They were all experienced guests of the universe, people who weren't afraid of dangers. However, this was basically the limit of their long journey. Because if they went any further, they would cross paths with another powerful domain, Hung River domain. There was a hidden rule in the universe. Kings didn't meet kings. Everyone had their own areas of activity. If they came into contact with each other too much, it would inevitably lead to disputes and separation. It would easily lead to conflicts between domains. This was something that neither side wanted to see. Therefore, the Ferris wheel was basically the final destination for the master and disciple. After experiencing the famous speed of this place, they would change their direction and head in another direction. In the cultivation world, Lu Xiaoyi wasn't the only one who dared to travel. This kind of trait was almost the standard of a powerful cultivator. Back then, Qing Xian also drifted outside for hundreds of years. In any case, he was still alive. It was just that Lu Xiaoyi was more abnormal in comparison. His starting time was measured in thousands of years. Just this alone was something that most cultivators couldn't do, not to mention attracting cats and dogs along the way. The 2 anchor chain people weren't easy to deal with. On this journey, they were both saints and robbers. They fought for justice and created trouble out of nothing. Like the master, the disciple was the same. The void of the universe was actually a paradise for people like them. He Qian's expression didn't change. He said to Sangui, I don't think any of those 3 cultivators are good people. 2 of them definitely know each other, but now they're acting like they don't know each other. They must be up to something. I don't know what they're planning. I can't see through the last cultivator. He seems very normal, but he also seems very dangerous. If he dares to come out alone, I'm afraid he won't be easy to deal with. Master, when we meet, shall we join in? I haven't killed anyone for more than 10 years. My skills are a little rusty. Sangui smiled, but didn't say anything. To be able to teach such a disciple, he himself wasn't a good person. He was also famous in the anchor chain domain for being vicious and merciless. However, he still had to act a little in front of the younger generation. It wouldn't be good to show too much. Even if he already had a judgment in his heart. Men die for wealth. Birds die for food. The crowd is bustling, all for profit. In my opinion, that space treasure might be the root of the disaster. Those 4 people acted as if there was no one around. They thought that they could use numbers to stop people. They're underestimating the heroes of the cultivation world. Even if it's just you and me, if we really want to, there's still a big chance, disciple. Don't be anxious. I reckon that those 3 cultivators might not be innocent. Let's just wait and see what happens. Then, we'll reap the benefits. He Qian smiled. Smart. Master is really smart. So you've already thought about it. I'll endure it and follow Master's lead. Chapter 1559. Among the 3 rogue cultivators, there was only one true rogue cultivator. Even if he closed his eyes and concentrated, he wouldn't be able to see anything. Under such circumstances, cultivators would rarely strike up a conversation with each other. This wasn't the time for leisure, but the time for hard work. Comprehending the Ferris wheel speed space Tao wasn't the moment before the space was broken, but the moment they were on the satellite. Prepare, enter a meditative state, and feel every change in the acceleration. Only in this way could one find a trace of opportunity that belonged to oneself in the tangled and complicated situation. The speed-dimensional space could appear at any time. Now wasn't the time to chat and make friends. However, if one already knew each other, it would be a different matter. Faceless Butcher by Guang and Black Corpse Venerable War Zombie were two rogue cultivators who knew each other. In the dozens of nearby universes, they weren't just famous, but they were existences that made cultivators tremble with fear. They were both in the primordial soul realm, and their strength far exceeded their peers. Many sects and forces hated them, but they couldn't do anything to them. Of course, their main range of activity was only in the dozens of nearby universes. If they went forward, they would encounter anchor chain cultivators, and if they went back, they would encounter the mysterious Hung River Orthodoxy. Powerful individuals weren't enough in front of powerful forces. However, the dozens of universes were enough for them to run rampant. As individuals, it was unlikely that they had the ambition to stir up trouble in the universe. The cultivator in charge of the Ferris wheel at Lu Valley Dojo didn't see through them, but the Three Cups master and disciple. As the most famous vicious cultivators in the dozens of nearby universes, how could they show their true faces in front of others? In the void, no one knew that these two loners were actually real brothers. They had never appeared together in front of others, and had always walked their own paths. But this time there were all kinds of coincidences. It was also one of the few times that these two brothers had cooperated since they had achieved success in their cultivation. How is it? Did you see through them? What's the background of these people? The Black Corpse asked. Outsiders knew that the two of them were notorious for their ruthlessness and never left anyone alive. However, very few people knew that under their ferocious image, the two of them were actually very cautious and considerate. The two of them came from the same source, and both of them had no misgivings about their own lives. That was when it came to others, but when it came to themselves, they were very careful. White Light smiled coldly. That master and disciple should be from the anchor chain. They thought that no one would recognize them, but their eyes were actually on their foreheads. They were nothing more than two chain fanatics. What about the Great Domain? Haven't we killed enough over the years? Their background did not mean everything. No one dared to provoke them when they were in the anchor chain, but since they had left, they had to abide by the rules of the void. How dare they stretch their hands out? I won't let them have their way. He then looked at the four from the Bizarre Mountain. But these four from the Bizarre Mountain are a little strange. The two Yuanian can be ignored. Boulder is also a famous character in the nearby universe, but he is nothing in front of us. The one I can't see clearly is the other true monarch from the Bizarre Mountain. This person's aura is deep, and there's a faint aura of death. I'm guessing that the reason why the four from the Bizarre Mountain dare to swagger here is because they have this person's help. Finally, he glanced at the guy who was sitting cross-legged alone with his eyes closed. This is a real traveler. He has some ability, but that's all. If there is a dispute, he will understand that traveling in the void of the universe is not a simple trip. The Black Corpse's face darkened. Let's wait. It's too early to make a move now. We will easily become the target of public criticism, but it doesn't matter. It's safest to wait until we enter the dimensional space. At that time, we won't be able to leave for about a month. It will be the best time for us to make a move. The only problem is that at that time, there might not only be people from our satellite entering the dimensional space. There might also be people from other satellites. When the time comes, there will be more people involved. You only know the people from this satellite, but you might not know the people from other satellites. White Light smiled coldly. Chaos is the best. Only when it's chaotic enough will we have a chance. When the time comes, as long as we spread the news, no one will be able to resist. Isn't taking things from chaos what you and I are good at? Both of them had come for that dimensional space treasure. In the cultivation world, the fight for treasures and resources was the main theme of disputes in the cultivation world. After all, there were very few orthodoxies like the sword vein who were not tempted by treasures. Most people were scrambling for treasures like flies to smelly meat. Among the treasures like the five elements, yin, yang, and thunder were more common and did not cause too much of a rush. However, some treasures were hard to come by. They were suitable for most cultivators and were rare. For example, the Destiny series, Time series, and Space series were all rarely seen. They did not know how the news of Huaiguang coming here with Shi Huai and Guangli was leaked. However, they could not foresee that it would attract the most ferocious bandits in the universe. This was also fate. Everyone was scheming against each other. Only a certain individual who had been looked down upon was still working hard. Lu Xiaoyi's aura could not be concealed for long. However, how could anyone who dared to walk in the void of the universe be weak? Among the cultivators of the fruit platter, he was a little out of place. He stood out from the crowd because of the cultivation characteristics of the fruit platter cultivators. A wolf was very conspicuous in a flock of sheep, but if it was mixed in with a pack of jackals, it would disappear into the crowd. In the eyes of others, he was a traveler with some ability. This was also the most common existence in the void of the universe. He focused all his attention on the acceleration of the satellite. For the indigenous cultivators of this world of cultivation, it was basically impossible to quantify acceleration from a scientific point of view. They lacked thousands of years of mathematical knowledge. But for Lu Xiaoyi, it was very simple. In any case, he was a gold-plated person who went to university in his previous life. Although he had long returned many things to his teacher, he still remembered some basic things more or less. Just these basic things were enough for him to solve the problem of acceleration. After all, this was just a high school knowledge. In his previous life, he was muddle-headed. However, now he had sharp ears and eyes. The development of his brain had far exceeded that of his previous life. With those vague memories, he had gained a lot from the deduction during this period of time. The theoretical formula was ready. He was just waiting for the moment when the qualitative change occurred. He did not need a lot of sensory experience. For this kind of pure mathematical problem, he only needed a few successful examples to find the fundamental point. He loved the ability to escape into different dimensions. It did not affect time, did not affect the escape method, and did not even affect the flying sword. He could go through and kill at the same time. It was just like flashing from one room to another in a maze. For the Zhongjian, this was a perfect match. He could use the Zhongjian to the extreme. As long as he thought of the Zhongjian shuttling back and forth between different dimensions in the future, he was inexplicably excited. It was right to come to the Ferris wheel. Chapter 1560. Of course, the movements of the four couldn't escape Lu Xiaoyi's sharp senses. Although his spatial ability wasn't outstanding, it wasn't inferior to anyone's. The spatial fluctuations released by the void-leaving crown were very clear to him, but he still needed to observe its real function. Being able to understand the mysteries of the other party's artifact without even looking at it was something that didn't exist in the cultivation world. At least, Lu Xiaoyi couldn't do it yet. He had more experience with combat artifacts, but he was much less familiar with cultivation artifacts. Therefore, he quietly observed and waited. On the surface, the 9 cultivators on this satellite were no different from those on the other satellites. They all sat cross-legged and waited silently. Underneath the calm surface, swords were drawn and bows were drawn, ready to explode at any moment. More than 20 days passed like this. During this time, several cultivators on the other satellites were brought into the space of speed. However, there was no movement on their side, and no one was in a hurry. 4 great cultivators, this was just the blink of an eye. Yanlu was just like his name. Although he sat quietly as usual, his mouth couldn't be idle. His habit was to complain. Everyone knew his problem. It wasn't that he was impatient, but that complaining had become a part of his life. Out of the 19 satellites, only one has entered the dimensional space after us. The others are all in order. If we continue to follow this order and don't change, there are still 15 satellites in front of us. According to the length of time, under normal circumstances, we will need at least 3 months to get the opportunity to enter the dimensional space. We'll have to wait for a long time. No one paid attention to him. He was already used to it, so he continued to talk to himself. Why does it take about a month to come out of the space of speed? Everyone here is proficient in the Tao of space. Why can't they try to break the wall by themselves? Won't it be crowded if everyone is squeezed together? Won't there be disputes? If there's a fight, it'll be terrible. We can't get out and can only run as far as we can. His endless chatter annoyed true monarch stone-hugging. Why does it take a month? Because the core planet of the Ferris wheel itself revolves around another star. It has a cycle of 1 month. Therefore, the space barrier it created had a period of 1 month. It's not that you can't break it, but you have to wait until you become a half-immortal. Of course, they wouldn't squeeze together. Any dimensional space was an infinitely large void. The barrier would always be by your side, but the distance could be infinitely far. When you were scattered within it, other than a few groups of cultivators who were thrown into the dimensional space at the same time, other cultivators would find it difficult to see them, and no one would stand in place and wait foolishly. Do you understand now? If you understand, then shut your mouth. You really don't give me any peace. Yinli shut his mouth obediently, but only to senior uncle Huai Shi. He continued to speak to junior sister Huai Jin. Junior sister, do you think this strange fellow is that monster from the sect? Otherwise, Martial Uncle wouldn't have dared to bring the two of us yuanning out to test his space treasure. It's very dangerous. I think the true monarchs on our satellite are all very fierce. Huai Jin sighed. Maybe. Senior brother, I say, can you not think of such nonsense? The matters of the elders will be decided by the elders. We only need to do as they say. Whether it's dangerous or not, why would the cultivators of our strange mountain be afraid of this? If you knew it was dangerous, then why did you follow us obediently back then? We couldn't even chase you away. Martial Uncle Huai Shi was a strange person in the strange mountain. He was extremely powerful and did as he pleased, ignoring the sect's rules. This new way of studying space was actually proposed by him, but it was still not very familiar. According to the other true monarchs of the strange mountain, they still needed to study it thoroughly before coming to the Ferris wheel to investigate. However, Huai Shi had a bad habit that all researchers had. Once he had an idea, it was like 100 scratches were scratching his heart, and he could no longer control his own thoughts. The Void Departure Crown was his personal property, and the old man had kept it a secret after he got it. In fact, he had the intention of secretly going to the Ferris wheel to test it out. He knew the thoughts of those old guys in the strange mountain too well. They were all very cautious, and waiting for them to make a decision would take hundreds of years. However, although Huai Shi had the demeanor of an old scholar, he was definitely not a true old-fashioned person. He had wandered the universe for thousands of years. What had he not seen? He was very experienced. He also placed great importance on his own safety. Thus, he brought out the sect's greatest weapon to protect himself. It was the true monarch beside him who had never spoken a word. The strange mountain naturally had its own strange points. Its orthodoxy was mysterious and often had its own secrets. However, it was not an orthodoxy that only knew how to live by the great Tao of space. It involved a wide range of things, and could even be said to be unimaginable. For example, this true monarch who had never spoken a word, although he could tell from his aura that he was an soul-perfected lord through and through if they were to really fight. Yinli pursed his lips. Although this junior sister looked like a fairy, her personality was not at all like a fairy. She was just a little old-fashioned person who was tightly bound by the sect's rules. Even if she had a Tao companion, she would probably only know how to do it in one position. There was no romance, and whoever married her would be unlucky. What do you think? If Martial Uncle's theory is correct, and the void departure crown really works, and one of the four of us is sent into the dimensional space first. It's fine if it's you and me, but if the one who doesn't speak is sent in, wouldn't we be in great danger? Jean looked at him with disdain. Do you think everyone else is stupid? The void departure crown can be controlled, okay? She was still a little uneasy, because she could not help here. Although she was outstanding among the nascent soul cultivators, the bizarre mountain was not an orthodoxy that was good at fighting. Although none of the perfected cultivators in front of them showed any malice towards them, the more they acted like this, the more worried they became. In a cultivation world, what did it mean to be indifferent towards a space treasure when they saw it? She still did not understand Marshall Uncle's thoughts, but she felt that it was not as simple as it seemed. Amidst everyone's boredom, the satellite they were on began to accelerate and decelerate violently once again. The novelty from when they first boarded the satellite had already disappeared. Now, they were already very used to this situation. They were used to the changes in speed brought about by the satellite, and they were also used to the changes in direction brought about by the void departure crown when it swept past their bodies. Just as they thought that this was a very normal change in speed, Jean only felt that the light in front of her was mottled. Her vision blurred, and she found herself in a foreign space. Around her, there was nothing, and there was no one. Marshall Uncle's conjecture had been confirmed, and the first person to confirm it was her. Chapter 1561. P.S. This is an old debt from last month. You can pay it back slowly. Lu Xiaoyi immediately sensed the change. To be honest, it was completely beyond his expectations. The four people in Strange Mountain and their strange treasures had always been the focus of his attention. He didn't feel guilty about plagiarizing other people's research. Why didn't you do it in your own cave abode? When the fairy-like girl disappeared into the dimensional space, he suddenly realized what the Strange Mountain man was doing. He also realized that he was missing something in his research. He was too focused on studying the changes in acceleration that he forgot to change the direction. This might be normal for cultivators in this world of cultivation, but for a time traveler who had studied physics in his previous life, it shouldn't have been this way. He should have realized that there were two aspects to the changes in acceleration. Besides the speed, there was also the direction. Apparently, the Strange Mountain man had realized this and was trying to figure out the real reason why the Ferris wheel could open up a dimensional space by studying the changes in the direction and acceleration of the Ferris wheel. It was a very creative idea, and it was even more imaginative than Lu Xiaoyi, who had some knowledge from his previous life. Lu Xiaoyi's advantage was that when he saw this, he immediately realized his shortcomings, while the others might not realize it immediately. Plagiarism also required a deep foundation of knowledge. For a good start, Lu Xiaoyi needed to grasp the accurate data of opening up a dimensional space. There must be a relationship between the changes in acceleration and the change in direction. It must be a relationship that could be described by mathematical and physical formulas. When he solved this formula, he would be the key to controlling the speed of the dimensional space. Intuitively, the changes in acceleration didn't need to be too big, and the change in direction didn't need to be too far off. The key was to find the solution. The Ferris wheel was always changing its speed and direction through countless unintentional attempts. It was like a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. It was an opportunity to open up a dimensional space. This was uncontrollable and meaningless in a battle. But he was different. He was a person who knew how to use formulas. Below the Ferris wheel, some of the cultivators who were paying close attention to the development of space noticed the situation. It was not that they were interested in the Strange Mountain man, but as an explorer who was obsessed with the great Tao of space, they could not afford to ignore everything and focus on the satellite. As a matter of fact, the moment they arrived at the Ferris wheel, they had already begun to comprehend the great Tao, including the development of space. Among them, there were even a small number of people who were the most meticulous. They stayed here all year round, not because they wanted to go up themselves. They couldn't afford to spend the spiritual opportunity to go up to the stars frequently, but it didn't hinder them from observing the situation of other people entering and exiting the space below. The Music Valley Training Hall didn't care about this. The more people gathered here, the more attractive it would be, wouldn't it? Lien Hung went to the several seniors in charge of the Ferris wheel and began to complain. Marshal uncles and marshal uncles, someone suddenly disappeared on the satellite. He must have used some method to escape into the dimensional space by borrowing the power of the Ferris wheel. What do you think? The perfected monarchs of Lagu did not mind at all. After a long while, a soft-hearted perfected monarch reminded him. So what? Of the cultivators who came here, which one of them didn't have such thoughts? Did they want to rely on their spatial ability to combine with the Ferris wheel and find a unique path that belongs to them? Over the thousands of years, such examples were not rare. Luck always existed, and it wasn't new. The key was how to distinguish between luck and a 100% success rate. Unfortunately, in the history of the Ferris wheel, there had never been a lack of coincidences, but there had never been anyone who had truly grasped the truth. Those four people were from the orthodoxies of the Strange Mountain, and they had some understanding of the Tao of space. It wasn't strange for them to be able to do this. However, the four of them held back for a few months before one of them entered. This was enough to show that their method was still very immature. In fact, it was just luck. It's not worth mentioning. The opinion of the Music Valley Training Hall's cultivators was the mainstream opinion. It was an experience that had never been wrong for thousands of years. In fact, it was indeed in line with the position of the Strange Mountain. The only thing they didn't expect was that there was someone on the satellite who knew how to use scientific methods from another world. However, this kind of result gave rise to some other stories. Ichien was somewhat moved. Master, I like that spatial treasure. 3 Cups took a sip. Since you were young, there have been many things that you like. I've taken the blame for you many times. If you like it, then find your own way. Don't bother me. You're already a perfected monarch, and you're still asking me for candy? Ichien was reassured. After being together for thousands of years, how could he not know his master's temper? What his master meant was that he also liked this thing. He could do whatever he wanted. If he got it easily, of course, it would be good. If there was trouble, he might have to go to war with his brothers and rob the master-disciple army. He laughed. No rush, no rush. Let's wait until we enter the dimensional space. I think there are more people who are more anxious than us. Let them make a move first, and then we'll finish up. We won't be punished by karma, and we can be the good guy. In the end, there will be benefits. 3 Cups smiled, but didn't say anything. At least he still had some brains. The 1,000 years of teaching him weren't in vain. Baishur was very gratified and excited. His guess was right. This was a historical breakthrough in the Tao of space, and he was the one who had laid the foundation. Thus, he put away the void departure crown and waited silently with everyone. Yenlu was very puzzled. Uncle, why did we stop? Will Junior's sister be in danger inside? Baishur glared at him. There's danger everywhere. There's no danger here? Your junior sister is stronger than you. At least she knew that she would be fighting alone when she went in. She even wanted to use the Void Departure Crown to split the power of the Bizarre Mountain and let others defeat her one by one. What's the danger of being alone? Isn't it dangerous to enter the dimensional space with your junior sister? We've already confirmed the theoretical basis. Next, we'll wait for the opportunity to go in together and try to meet up with your junior sister. Then, I still have some ideas to confirm inside. The satellite returned to silence. Everyone tacitly turned a blind eye to what had just happened. However, the more they acted like this, the weirder the atmosphere was. Even the talkative Yanli felt it. Uncle Master, why do I feel like they're all acting weird? I'm afraid they're up to no good. Baishur sneered. If they're not tempted by such a dimensional treasure, then there's a real problem. So what if they're tempted? The Bizarre Mountain has always been kind to others in the cultivation world of the nearby universe. Over the years, we have always swallowed our humiliation and endured it. Your seniors may be able to endure it, but I can't. The other purpose of my visit this time is to kill those who are secretly sending their claws to us. Chapter 1562. After a few more days, Lu Xiaoyi's vision darkened as he entered the dimensional space. But even if the change was sudden, he had accurately recorded the change in speed and direction. It was something he had been preparing for all this while. There were not only 8 people in the dimensional space, but 17. It was obvious that the 2 satellites had broken the wall at the same time. The 17 people appeared in the dimensional space and quickly distanced themselves from each other. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi entered, he tried to find a way out. However, he found that the wall-breaking power he possessed was exceptionally strong in this dimensional space supported by the Ferris wheel. This brought about another problem. What if in the future, when he fought with his opponent's spatial wall was exceptionally strong? Of course, the power of a human cultivator could never be compared to the power of nature. It was impossible for a cultivator to trap him for more than a month with a single slash. However, in a battle, this kind of trap only needed to last for a few breaths to create a new battlefield situation. This was a new way to use space. However, if you took the initiative to break through the dimensional space instead of passively following others, you would not fall into your opponent's trap. Among the 17 people, some of them were like Lu Xiaoyi, exploring the secrets of space. However, the other group did not stop there. Bai Guang released his divine sense. "You bastard! You rashly used a spatial artifact and pulled everyone into a dimensional space under abnormal circumstances, causing everyone's perception to deviate. Such actions are truly unreasonable. Today, I'm speaking up for justice to prevent everyone from using this transmigration as the basis, because there's an artifact's influence in this transmigration." Faceless Butcher Bai Guang's entry point was very vicious. He did not say that he was coveting other people's treasures. Instead, he focused on the influence of the Void Crown on the wall-breaking space. People could not help but be suspicious. There was a female cultivator in Strange Mountain who had somehow transmigrated first. That was something everyone saw. There was no doubt that the spatial artifact had played a role in it. Therefore, although Bai Guang did not use the Void Crown again, it was difficult for him to wash away this dirty water. If you say it's useless, how can you prove it? Since there was a precedent, who knows what would happen later? At the very least, you should take out that spatial artifact and let everyone feel it, right? This was the most basic requirement. Everyone had spent hundreds of dollars just to get this chance. They wanted nothing more than to study and comprehend the secret of the Ferris wheel. Therefore, they needed the most accurate and pure perception. Now that your space treasure was mixed in, all of their perception would be skewed. Wouldn't it be a waste of everyone's time to transmigrate? Who knew how much this treasure had affected the broken walls? Which direction? It would be equivalent to coming in for nothing, and the perception they received was mixed with external interference. Naturally, it would cause public anger. Everyone on the satellite they were on knew that the strange hillman did not use the power of the space artifact in the end, but they all had their own plans. The White Light Battle Zombie and Sangahichian had their own plans too. They were just enjoying the show, while the 9 people on the other satellite were the ones who were instigating the strange hillman. They didn't know much about the inside story. Even if they knew a little, it wasn't comprehensive. It was easy for others to sow discord between them. Moreover, everyone coveted the space artifact. Even if they couldn't get it themselves, they could use this opportunity to learn from it. Among the 9 people, there were 4 perfected cultivators and 5 Yuaning. Seeing the stalemate, 3 lone Yuaning cultivators decided to leave. They were all smart people. With so many perfected cultivators around, it would be dangerous for them to get involved. If they didn't leave, would they be waiting for a free lunch to fall from the sky? The other 2 Yuaning cultivators didn't leave. It wasn't that they had the ability to fight against the perfected cultivators, but they were like Yin Li. They had their own perfected cultivators around, so they had nothing to fear. Huasher didn't try to explain. It was useless. This wasn't something that could be explained with words. He put his hands behind his back. If you want the space artifact, just say it. Why do you have to talk about this nonsense? Fellow Taoist, you must have been tempted for a long time on the satellite, right? It must have been hard for you to wait until now. You still want to encourage others to take the risk for you? Do you think we're all idiots? He faced all the cultivators. I come from the Strange Mountain. Friends from a nearby universes must have heard about it. The Strange Mountain style of doing things can't be hidden from others. Today, if you can give me face and not get involved, you can come to the Strange Mountain in the future and have fun with my space artifact. If you really want to get the space artifact, you'll have to go through me. You'll also have to go through those with ulterior motives. For example, this person who tried to sow discord. So have you thought it through? The older the ginger, the spicier it was. Once he said that, the people in front of him began to hesitate. Yes, the most important thing for those who wanted to make a living was to be clear-eyed. They had to be able to judge the situation and not be led by their own greed. This was the foundation of living a long life. Most of the cultivators here were perfected cultivators. They were old birds that had lived for at least 1,000 years. They wouldn't be so easily provoked and rush forward. They had to weigh the pros and cons. Should they snatch the space artifact from the many perfected cultivators and enjoy it alone? Or should they leave the Strange Mountain with a favor so that they could be friends in the future? Everyone had their own ideas, but there was a common point in everyone's thoughts. They wanted to see how the situation developed before making a decision. Therefore, the remaining 6 people on the satellite didn't leave. Of course, it was even more impossible for them to leave, whether it was the 2 thieves or the anchor chain master and disciple. The scene was very awkward. This was the awkwardness of having too many fellow thieves. Thieves A, B, C, D, and E. Should they fight among themselves first? Or should they deal with the victim first and then divide the loot? Neither was easy. The problem was very complicated, but there were also some who simplified the problem, such as a certain individual. Lu Xiaoyi said, "Fellow Taoist, your space artifact is very magical. I want to take a look, but I'm just a passerby. I'm afraid that I won't have time to visit the Strange Mountain in the future. So, I want to take a look now. After that, I won't participate in this matter anymore. I wonder if Senior can agree?" It was necessary to take a look at this space artifact. The main thing was to figure out how it changed the direction of space. Perhaps after pondering for a while, he would be able to find the truth. But this would take a lot of time, and he might not have the time to wait. These people were all ferocious and not easy to get along with. No matter who got their hands on the treasure in the future, it would be very difficult to get it back for further study. Since that was the case, why didn't Taoist Bao Shi be generous when he intended to use the treasure to divide the bandits? To be honest, when everyone was waiting on the satellite to travel through space, it was a bit inappropriate for him to experiment with his space artifact. It was fine to experiment with it behind closed doors, but if he took it out on the Ferris wheel, it would more or less affect others. In this regard, Faceless Demonic Man by Guang's words weren't completely unreasonable. Chapter 1563. It was infuriating to have such a traitor in a group of bandits. As a member of the bandits, shouldn't he maintain the same rhythm as everyone else? Shouldn't he maintain the order of the robbery? Even Bao Shi was surprised. You want to see it first? Take away my treasure? How can you guarantee that you won't be tempted by the treasure and run away? Swear an oath or something else? Lu Xiaoyi said naturally, "No oath. I don't even believe in oaths, let alone others. It's up to you. Are you willing to trust a stranger? But I don't think Strange Mountain is popular. You can't even find a single person willing to help you on 2 satellites. Have you ever thought about the reason?" Yanli couldn't help but say, "This senior is so rude. It's fine if you don't want to swear an oath, but you dare to use words against Strange Mountain. Do you think you can achieve your goal this way?" Lu Xiaoyi sighed. "Why would I do that? I'm just curious about the space treasure. It's up to you whether you want to give it to me or not." Yanli was about to speak, but was stopped by Uncle Bao Shi. This fellow Taoist wants to see the secret of the Void Crown in advance. It's human nature. I'm not a stingy person. There are so many fellow Taoists here. I'm not afraid that someone won't return it. But I have a reminder. If anything happens after the treasure is in your hands, it has nothing to do with me. Fellow Taoist, you can't blame Strange Mountain for this. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I'll take responsibility for my decision. Bao Shi agreed to lend the treasure to someone else. This was beyond everyone's expectation. They didn't know each other, so how could they build trust? No matter how generous Dafa was, there was no reason for him to take it out now. But this matter was hard to understand at the moment. They all regretted not being the first to speak. Bai Guang said meaningfully, "Young man, it's not easy to cultivate to this step. Take a step back and you'll have a better view." "I'm afraid that." Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. "Are you threatening me?" He Qian also said, "He's threatening you. If you don't want to take the risk, you can actually pass the risk to others. For example, I'm very willing to help others out." He was surrounded by tigers and wolves. Giving the treasure to others to transfer the danger seemed to be a good idea. But wasn't this method too weak? For cultivators, they would rather fight to the death. Normal people wouldn't give it to them, and normal people wouldn't accept it either. However, it was clear that the two people in front of him weren't normal people. Lu Xiaoyi accepted the void departure crown. Ignoring the gazes of everyone present, he calmly waved the treasure in his hand. "I don't care what you think. I'm trying to comprehend the treasure. I'll kill anyone who dares to have any thoughts about it." These words were a bit too much. A single traveler dared to threaten a dozen people who were like wolves and tigers? If he wasn't a lunatic, then he was a ferocious person. As for which one it was, he would only know after trying it out. Lu Xiaoyi did not care about them. Threatening them was for the sake of peace. In the world of cultivation, there was no perfect warning method. Relatively speaking, threats were always more effective than kind words. This was also a fact. Playing with the void departure crown in his hand, he began to channel his spiritual energy into it, trying to control it. All of this was done without the slightest scruple, treating others as nothing. This kind of attitude really made many people continue to maintain a wait-and-see attitude. At least, the 6 cultivators on the other satellite did not act blindly without thinking. However, there were still 2 groups of people who had vicious thoughts in their hearts. White Light sneered at Zhangjiang. "This guy ruined our plans. We can't forgive him. Is he used to having a smooth journey that he doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth?" Zhangjiang laughed. "Walking on the void, we can't do without these arrogant people. They think they can look down on heroes just because they have some ability. Don't worry. Let's see how he deals with the trouble below." On the other side, He Qin was also very angry. "Master, this is a madman. I don't dislike madmen, as long as they don't target me. Can you see through his orthodoxy?" 3 Cups smiled bitterly. "You think your master is a deity? His origin is unknown, his aura is unfamiliar, and his actions are arrogant. I think he must have some background behind him, but he's definitely not from Honghe. I can tell with one look that the big fruit platter person's actions are not so arrogant, so I can't guess it either." He Qin asked, "This person can ask for treasures to view from Strange Mountain. Then we can also—" 3 Cups said meaningfully, "If you just want to take a look, then that's not a problem. But you just want to take a look and don't want to take advantage of it?" He Qin chuckled. His master saw through his thoughts at a glance. He had a strong desire to possess these treasures, but he also had a habit. He enjoyed the process of possession, but not the results. There were many times when he spent a lot of effort to snatch something, but in the end, with a few soft words from others, he could take it back. 3 Cups looked at the Taoist who was still fiddling with the treasures. "This person is somewhat unfathomable. We are guests here, and we don't understand the situation very well. It's best if we don't make the first move. I think the person who sowed discord is the one who is determined to get the treasures. We just have to keep an eye on them, and the result will probably be the same." Lu Xiaoyi fiddled with the void crown for a few moments, and he had a rough understanding of how it worked. He didn't necessarily need this thing. For a swordsman, if he needed the help of an artifact in battle to allow him to freely enter and exit the dimensional space, then why would he need to study it? He could just directly collect the treasures. Swordsmen's habit was to not rely on artifacts, but their physical bodies. That was their true possession, and they would never lose it. At the same time, They would constantly deepen their understanding of the Tao of space. This was the principle of the sword vein. With artifacts, the human factor would be weakened. This was the biggest taboo of cultivation. He only wanted to understand the basic principle of the void crown's spatial orientation, and then use his physical body to complete all of this in the future. He had an advantage in speed, understood the spatial gate, and could deduce formulas. He was very confident in truly mastering the dimensional space at this speed. Therefore, he only needed a few moments to understand what he wanted to know. As for the other effects of the void crown, he didn't care about them. After he finished his observation, he raised his hand and threw the treasure back. His action was not unexpected. No one would dare to steal a treasure in this kind of environment, as it would incur the wrath of the crowd. Bao Shi caught the treasure and praised, "Fellow Taoist, you are a man of your words. Strange mountain befriends you. You must have reached great success in the Tao of space, or else you wouldn't have been able to finish appraising it so quickly." Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. "Since I have reached great success in the Tao of space, I won't be coming to the Ferris wheel. Senior, this treasure is very mysterious. It's not mine, so why should I look at it so clearly? The more I see it, the more I want to take it away. With so many tigers and wolves around, wouldn't it be terrible?" Everyone laughed. His words were honest. Then a cultivator asked, "What? You're not going to rob people?" Lu Xiaoyi cupped his fists and bowed. "I'm used to being pretentious while traveling in the void. I'm sorry. Chapter 1564. Holding Rock took the levitation crown and continued with Dafa. "Fellow Taoist, you have seen the treasure and returned it to me. Strange Mountain has one more friend. So, who else is willing to be friends with Strange Mountain? You can also borrow it for a look. This old man will not favor one and discriminate against the other." This was a very generous proposal, and several cultivators were tempted, especially the cultivators on the other satellite. They were the kind of people who happened to be there at the right time, and they were more inclined toward the latter when it came to forcefully seizing the treasure or using it as a reference. A few cultivators were interested, and Stonehoy chuckled. "My treasure has a strange feature. It is nostalgic. Whoever it touched, it would be able to sense whether the cultivator who touched it had good intentions, and whether they had the intention to snatch it away. If they had good intentions, the next time it would belong to whoever touched it. It would be guided by this person who had good intentions. So, fellow Taoist, who do you want to be friends with?" Lu Xiaoyi pointed at a random person on the other satellite. The levitation crown was also magical. It flew straight to him as if he was the owner. By now, Lu Xiaoyi had achieved his goal. He had experienced the power of space in the Ferris wheel and gained some benefits from Strange Mountain. He could have left like this. However, Holding Rock's behavior was very strange. Since he couldn't leave now, he might as well stay and watch the fun. One by one, the treasure was passed to another. Gradually, everyone was addicted to watching it. Because time was limited, it was impossible to study the treasure too deeply. Most people only analyzed the mechanism of the power of space. Everyone knew that if Holding Rock was willing to show it to others so Dafa, he must have a special control method. Therefore, no one was too serious about it. Who knew if this old man was digging a hole for them? In the end, the treasure was passed to He Qian. Behind him were Bai Guang and Zhanjiang. However, after he saw the treasure, he assigned it to Holding Rock. This was a blatant provocation. Holding Rock also joined in the fun. After taking back the treasure, he put it in his arms and no longer lent it to others. No one knew if it was because he had discussed it with Anchor Chain or because they had a tacit understanding. The two thieves found that they had been tricked. After everyone present had seen the Void Departure Crown, who would give them a chance to cause chaos? A bandit should be straightforward in his actions. If he thought too much and considered too much, he would lose the meaning of being a bandit. Black Corpse Zhan Zhang's blood was boiling. He wanted to use force. It didn't matter whether he could snatch the treasure or not. What was important was how to vent his anger. But White Light stopped him. "Don't be angry. This is a trap set against us. I was wondering how the news about the Void Departure Crown got out, so it was done on purpose. Other than us, the people on this satellite are all from Strange Mountain, or they're the helpers they found. Just now, that individual customer deliberately spoke big words in an attempt to provoke us into attacking. We held back, but in the end, the first plan didn't work, so they came up with another plan. These two people deliberately humiliated us. This is the rhythm of wanting to take action in the dimensional space. We can't be at their mercy. It's not too difficult to deal with the 5 of them, but don't forget, there are 4 Supremes on the other satellite. Once we fight, the possibility of them hitting us when we're down is very high. Black Corpse Zhang took a deep breath. He had wandered the universe for thousands of years and had experienced all kinds of storms. To be able to survive until now under the encirclement of so many forces, it showed that these two were not boors who blindly fought for power. Divine Sense replied, "It makes sense. These guys are hypocrites. Since they lured us here, why don't they just surround us and kill us? They want to take off their pants to vent and find some so-called high-sounding reasons. They want to be righteous. They will never understand that what killed them was never the so-called strength, but this hypocrisy." The two reacted very quickly. Although it was not very accurate, they were aware of the danger they were in at the first moment. White Light chuckled. "We came so early and didn't even make it to the evening market. It seems that I was rash. Previously, I was biased in my suspicions about fellow Taoist Baosher, and I was not careful enough with my words. This is my fault. We only have ourselves to blame for being unable to see the treasure. Here, I sincerely apologize to you. Fortunately, it didn't cause any consequences, and we still have the chance to meet." Lu Xiaoyi, who was watching from the side, immediately left when he heard this. To be honest, the bandit was not a bandit, and the senior was not a senior. It was like a crappy soap opera. If you want to rob, go ahead and do it. We have just entered the dimensional space and don't know the situation, so it's the right time to do it. Also, that old Taoist Baosher was not a kind person. No one knew what evil things he was hiding in the dark. It was better to stay away from such a cunning old man. He had received benefits from the Strange Mountain. Regarding the direction of the change of speed and Dafa's display of the treasure, although he might not be sincere, benefits were benefits. He was a person who clearly distinguished between kindness and hatred. Seeing him leave, the rest of the cultivators also left. At least, the cultivators on the other satellite left without hesitation. Sangui and He Qian looked at Baosher meaningfully, and the master and disciple also left together. They also felt that something was wrong. This old man seemed to be hiding something from them. After entering the dimensional space, everything seemed to be under someone's control. For cultivators like them, this feeling was very different. They were not kind people, and the way to get out of this situation was actually very simple. Just like the madman who saw the treasure, they just left and let the Strange Mountain Man deal with the changes by himself. Life was worthless in the world of cultivation. No one would risk their life for you just because they saw a treasure, especially when they couldn't see through this old man. In the end, only the 2 bandits and the 5 people from the Strange Mountain were left. The 2 bandits were also confused. Their guess was obviously wrong. The madman and the master and disciple in front of them were not with the Strange Mountain. Then, where did Baosher's confidence come from? The 2 bandits approached with hideous smiles. Zhang Jiang was very curious. He had too many questions. "Old Baosher, I thought you set a trap to lure us into it. It turns out that these people are not with you at all." Baosher's expression didn't change. He smiled and said, "Faceless manslaughters by Guang and Black Corpse Zhang. Although you changed your appearance, I didn't mistake you, did I? Of course, this is a trap. It was from a moment you received the news. These years, you have caused a lot of trouble in the universe, including the Strange Mountain Man. I have wanted to find you for a long time, but I didn't have the chance. This time is not a coincidence. I spent a lot of effort." Bai Guang said in a low voice. "Oh, then I want to know, how did you do it? Just the 3 of you? And there's even a lowly nascent soul stage cultivator?" Baosher shrugged. "I wanted to gather everyone to work together, But I didn't expect the fierce duo of black and white in the universe to admit defeat. One wrong move, and the whole game is lost. These ungrateful things, after receiving benefits from the old Taoist, ran away quickly. Fine, I admit defeat. The treasure will be my compensation, okay? Chapter 1565. P.S. My apologies for the late update. Seeing the void departure crown being thrown at him, Bai Guang was extremely cautious. They were all in the realm of monarchs and were all thousand-year-old foxes. If Lu Xiaoyi and Anchor Chain could see that something was wrong with the old man, how could they not? He shouted, "Second brother, don't touch the void departure crown. This old man is strange. Let's kill him first and talk later." The black and white fiends finally showed their usual fierceness and returned to their usual way of doing things. They grasped the crux of the problem and killed this old man first. Then, the rest would be easily solved. Bao Shi sneered. "Do we need outside support to kill you two? We, the strange mountain man, are enough." Before he could finish speaking, the strange true monarch who had never spoken before had already dashed toward the two of them. Ain's spirit, although not weak, dared to act brave in front of two senior primordial soul cultivators? If they couldn't kill him in 3 breaths, their thousands of years of cultivation would be in vain. Although they looked down on the Ain's spirit, they were not careless at all. This was also the reason why they were able to survive until now. One on the left and one on the right. Although they hadn't worked together for hundreds of years, this didn't affect their tacit understanding. The strange Ain's spirit was not afraid at all. It even dared to divide its power to block the two. This was the stupidest way of fighting. Shouldn't it hide and fight one, and then wait for Bao Shi to help? But Bao Shi didn't have any intention of helping. He just stood there and watched the battle with a smile. Bai Guang sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. He couldn't be afraid to kill just because something was wrong, right? Thinking of this, the 3 people's techniques had already connected. How could the strange Ain's spirit be a match for the two of them? There was already a gap between their realms. How could it fight against 2 people at the same time? As the black and white fiend's power hit the strange monarch, the two didn't expect it to be so simple. But in the next moment, something strange happened. The body of the strange Ain's spirit shattered into light under the joint attack of the two. It didn't have a human body at all. It was like an energy creature. The destruction of this energy creature was pushed back in reverse in an instant, following the force of the 2 great bandits. This was a reversal that couldn't be avoided, because this wasn't some kind of real power, but rather the cover of the space of the unseen. The next moment, the 2 bandits disappeared without a trace. Only the levitation crown was left spinning in the void. Bao Shi waved his hand and retrieved the treasure. He turned to the dumbfounded Yanli and said, "Why? Are you scared?" Yanli was a little embarrassed. He was indeed afraid. The reputation of these 2 people in the dozens of nearby universes was too frightening. He was afraid that the 3 of them wouldn't be able to handle them because he didn't have any fighting ability in front of such ferocious and stubborn people. "No, I'm just worried about Martial Uncle," Bai Shi chuckled. There were some changes to the plan, but at least he managed to deal with it. Now that he was halfway to success, he was in a good mood and was willing to say a few more words. After all, it would be a great loss if there was no audience for such an exquisite assassination. There's nothing wrong with being afraid. If you're not strong enough, you should be afraid. Otherwise, if you continue to charge up, isn't that just courting death? The true strength of our strange mountain orthodoxy is indeed inferior to these 2 ferocious people, including your martial uncle. But what I want to tell you is that fighting isn't just about the size of a fist. It's more about wisdom. This is the foundation of man being the spirit of all things. Can your lifespan be compared to a spirit treasure? Can your body be compared to a demon beast? Can your soul be compared to a spirit body? We humans compete in wisdom. Yanli still didn't quite understand. "Martial Uncle, please speak slowly. My brain is still a little muddled." Bao Shi was a little proud. Even with his wisdom, he was still a little vain. This was also a human characteristic. I brought the sex Holy Spirit, you know that. But what you don't know is that I've already merged the sex Holy Spirit and the levitation crown into one. So now, the Holy Spirit of our strange mountain can also be called the Spirit of Space. Yanli nodded like a chick pecking rice. Of course, he knew that the silent monarch was the treasure of the strange mountain, the Holy Spirit, Yuan. But he didn't know that his martial uncle was so bold that he dared to merge the Holy Spirit with his own space item. Although he was shocked, he wasn't stupid. He knew that now wasn't the time to be serious, and it wasn't his place to be serious about this kind of thing anyway. Bao was still unsatisfied. The levitation crown's ability is not only to change the direction of space, it also has an important function, which is to create a space within a space. This function is useless in the normal main world. We can't capture enemies, so we have to enter a dimensional space to activate its function. Which dimensional space is the safest? It's not the one we built when we fought the ferocious people, but the one we built on the Ferris wheel. Only here, no one will think of being pulled into a space again. Only then can we capture these two ferocious people. Do you understand? Yin Li somewhat understood. I understand now. Then we can wear them down in the space. Bao shook his head. How can we wear them down? According to the rules of the heavenly Tao, an item's ability can't go against the heavens. You can catch people, but you can't wear them down, and vice versa. So when they go in, besides not being able to come out, we can't do anything to them at all. Maybe they can live longer than us in there. Except for being lonely. Yan Li was a bit disappointed. This kind of trap can't make people feel at ease, but at least we got rid of two big evils for the nearby universe. But Martial Uncle, since the Holy Spirit now has such an ability, it seems that you could have directly attacked them when you first entered the dimensional space. Why do you have to go through so much trouble? If you let people look at them one by one, wouldn't it be terrible if they found out about the Holy Spirit's true strength? Or do you have other plans? This question was exactly what Bao was itching to ask. He was also a good supporting actor. Hee, at least you have some brains. You're not that stupid. If we really keep these two fellows in there for hundreds or thousands of years, who can be assured that they won't think of a way to get out? And most importantly, the space inside the space can only exist in such a dimensional space. Once we leave the main world, the space will immediately shatter, and the two ferocious people will naturally escape. It would be strange if they don't come to our strange mountain to kill us. Yinli was a bit nervous. Martial Uncle, then what should we do? Bao was very proud. That's why your Martial Uncle, I, made such an unnecessary move the moment we entered the dimensional space. Not for anything else, but to create resentment. To make these people feel bad for each other. Then we'll gather them in the space and let them kill each other. The space can't wear them down, but they can wear each other down. Yin Li's eyes widened. You still want to pull people in? Bao sneered. Of course. Why do you think I let them use the treasures? It's to let them leave their own space aura in the treasures so that we can find them easily. Why find them? I'll send them in one by one, and there will be a good show to watch. Chapter 1566. P.S. My apologies for my late update. Yin Li was still a little worried. Uncle, these two are the most ferocious people in the surrounding universes. I've never heard of anyone who can surpass them in terms of power, let alone the two of them together. If you send them in one by one, don't send them all to their deaths. Huashi's heart was as hard as iron. So what? None of these guys are good people. They all deserve to die. But you don't have to worry too much. As far as I know, there are also strong people among them. For example, the master and the disciple are both strong people from the upper realm of the anchor chain. We can't find anyone to deal with the two murderers here. But if it's a strong person from the upper realm, then it's hard to say. Yinli thought about it. The plan was indeed meticulous and flawless. Uncle, since the Holy Spirit has been brought into the space, how do those cultivators take them in? When the space didn't exist, The Holy Spirit could appear in the form of a human being, but if the space was occupied, it had to fuse with the void separation crown. It couldn't be separated for even the slightest bit in order to maximize the treasure's power, just like the scroll of Eternal River. Huasher laughed. That's why I gave each of them a chance to see the treasure. With this reason, it's easy to capture them. Just watch, there are still 9 people outside. The 2 Yuanying don't matter, but the 7 Supremes are enough for the black and white malevolent duo to deal with. Even if we can't kill them, we can still exhaust them. Let's just wait and see. Yanli admired him from the bottom of his heart. His Uncle Master's plan was indeed a whimsical one, a work of the gods. Apart from the fact that it was like refining the treasures of the strange mountain town for personal use, which made him feel a little uncomfortable. If everyone did that, how could the orthodoxy continue? As if guessing his thoughts, Huasher glanced at him. You think I'm doing this for myself? If not for the few cultivators we lost a few years ago, would I take this risk? Those old guys in Strange Mountain don't want to make progress. They're all like cowards. How long will it take for them to come back for revenge? The murderers are very clear. They just don't make a move. I'm so anxious. However, this treasure won't be mine in the future. Back then, the Holy Spirit was the public property of Strange Mountain. After fusing with the Void Crown, it's still the public property. It's just that I'm using it faster. Yanli laughed dryly. How would I dare to doubt Martial Uncle? It's because of this series of changes that I'm feeling a little weak in the knees. Baosher waved his hand. What's there to be afraid of? It's not like we need to do anything. Find those people, approach them, and take out their treasures. They had just seen the void leaving Crown, and now was the time to easily take it. Follow me closely and watch how I purge these evil creatures in the universe. Yanli didn't dare to say too much because he was afraid that he would make a mistake. He was no longer a child. He had reached the realm of Yuanying and was a very outstanding figure in Strange Mountain. Martial Uncle's method of carrying the stone was very amazing, but the strangeness of it couldn't be concealed no matter what. All of this sounded reasonable, but there were also many things that were wrong. For example, for such a big operation, why didn't he inform the monarchs in the mountains, but only the 2 of them, Yuanying? Why? Was it really just the 2 of them who were outstanding? Or were there other unspeakable reasons? Other than the 2 beasts, were those people really evil beyond redemption? Were they robbers? Not necessarily, right? Why didn't they let them go? This was definitely not a coincidence, but a plan to pull a large number of people into the space. It didn't matter if these people coveted the treasures or not. The more Yanli thought about it, the more frightened he was, but he couldn't show any abnormalities on his face. Martial Uncle Baosher was the kind of cultivator who didn't have many friends in Strange Mountain. He was usually a loner who was obsessed with his own cultivation and research. He often heard from his teacher that this Martial Uncle was a little crazy, but he didn't take it seriously. Now it seemed that he was right. His only hope now was to quickly find junior sister Huaijin. Her brain was more flexible than his, and she thought deeper. Or, in this case, it was best not to meet her. Following behind Baosher, Yanli's heart was in a mess. But with his status and ability, what could he do? Lu Xiaoyi was running at the front, because he felt that it was boring. A group of people scheming against each other, each scheming against the other. It was annoying to watch. There were people like this everywhere, so he might as well focus on his own things. So far, he had only established a 1-yuan linear equation because he had only been thrown into the Ferris wheel once. There were still many variables to be solved in the acceleration and direction changes. He needed to be thrown into the Ferris wheel again and again in order to establish a multivariate equation until he could solve the final answer. Therefore, the most important thing for him now was to return to the main space, to the Ferris wheel, and to use the communication device a few more times. His research on the void corona wasn't useless, but it was focused on how to create a spatial direction change. When he solved his multidimensional equation and knew how to achieve a balance between acceleration and direction change, he would solve the next problem. How to use the change of speed through his escapability. How to use the change of direction like the void corona. Step by step, he only had one goal: In the future, his sword escape would no longer be a pure escape through the main space, but an escape through the dimensional space. If he could achieve this, who would be able to catch him in the future? Who would be able to lock onto him with their divine sense? There would be no need to defend anymore. When he escaped into the dimensional space, all attacks would be ineffective. He was truly fearless. Right now, he was experimenting. He was experimenting on how to achieve a sudden change of speed like the Ferris wheel. Swordsmen were good at escaping. This was a characteristic of their orthodoxy. Liu Shaoyi especially liked this method. It was something that was fused into their blood and could not be cut off. However, swordsmen's escaping technique didn't focus on the change of speed. They focused more on the sudden change of direction under high speed, and their whereabouts were unknown. The core of this technique was to prevent the opponent from predicting where they would land next, and to not be able to predict their movements in advance. However, this kind of escaping technique didn't change much in speed, because swordsmen always believed that speed was the only way to protect their lives. They wouldn't deliberately slow down in order to find a change of pace. Right now, he wanted to change the method of escaping that he had been familiar with for thousands of years. He wanted to slow down while he was moving, then speed up again. He wanted to find the feeling of changing speed between speed and speed. Changing speed wasn't a uniform speed, nor was it a uniform speed. Instead, it was a change of speed. Theoretical understanding and practical application were two different concepts. It wasn't just a test of his ability to increase speed. It was also a test of habit correction. However, under Liu Shaoyi's persistence, he made rapid progress. This was because the cornerstone of his speed was Constellation's Tira. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.